Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight we're diving into the origins and lore behind the Star Phantoms. Before we get into that, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor or the Dark Gods. I want to thank you guys for your support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get into the video.
The chapel is a wound carved deep into the spine of the old warship. Steel ribs arch above like the bones of some titanic carcass, heavy with frost and the weight of centuries. Chains dangle from the arching beams, each one threaded with skulls that bump softly together whenever the ship shudders in its berth. Candles burn in cages welded to the bulkheads, their flames trembling in the cold drafts that sneak through the gaps in ancient armor plating. The air tastes of oil and old smoke, and the copper tang of dried blood, thickened further by the slow exhalations of the sensor engines that creep along the nave like blind, shuffling beasts. Incense spills from their iron moors and coils through the darkness, winding about the kneeling giants in ash-pale plate. A score of star phantoms are at prayer, armor locked, helm lenses dark. Their war plate is the color of grave dust, pale and flat, the black of their shoulder insets dull rather than polished. On each pauldron and hourglasses, picked out, not in clean geometric lines, but as twin human skulls, jawless and leering, brow ridges joined by a narrow band of cracked metal. Faint letters are burnt into that band, written in a dead high Gothic hand that once named the Emperor as Lord of Time and of Endings. Those sigils are not clean. They never are. Gauntleted thumbs move slowly, methodically, over the hourglass badges, grinding a thin smear of bone dust into every crevice. Little phials of that dust hang from rosaries attached to their breastplates and belts. Enemy dead, rendered down and sanctified, mixed with ash from destroyed reliquaries and the flakes of stone chipped from the walls of lost shrines. The powder whispers against ceramite as it is worked in, a soft rasp that combines with the drone of chant and the hiss of censers into a single low, continuous murmur. Servitors mounted in the walls beat drums with stick-thin arms of vat-grown muscle and bronze. Each stroke marks the passing of another fragment of imperial history into oblivion. The vox shrines sing over the drums and the murmured litanies. They are iron skulls bolted to the bulkheads in stacks of 6 and 8 and 10, their hollow eyes stained with verdigris and tallow smoke, vox grills set where teeth should be. From each one comes a different voice, some crackling, some distant, some distorted beyond recognition, a chorus of murmured oaths and death cries and final prayers. These are not recordings taken from glorious battlefield sermons. They are fragments ripped from helmet feeds and damaged Auspex logs, the last sounds made by star phantoms as they died in 100 different wars. The chapter calls this place the Hall of Echoes. Brother Chaplain Darnak stands before the altar, Crozius planted on the deck between his feet. The haft is wrapped in dried, flayed skin, stretched until it creaks whenever his grip tightens. At its head, the stylized skull of office is reworked into an hourglass form, its twin faces cast. Downward, their hollow eyes fixed on the ossuaries stacked beneath the altar slab. He does not move while the servitors chant the invocation of passing. He does not need to. Life, to the star phantoms, is only ever the pause between endings. He has stood here for hours according to the ship's chronometers, lost in the slow tide of incense and remembered blood. Brother. The word is a whisper in his helm vox. The voice is young, unscarred by the vox rasp that comes with centuries of service. Darnak flicks a slate-green gaze towards the neophyte, kneeling at the edge of the nave. The initiate's armor is plain, the ash-white not yet marked by campaign honor or penitential script. The hourglass on his shoulder is unshadowed, cleanly painted, the skulls still idealized rather than scarred. His helm is mag-locked to his belt. His face is tight with effort and something like awe. You are distracted, Darnak says, His voice is low and flat, the accent of no known world. The neophyte bows his head further, forehead knocking the rim of the prayer rail. "Forgive me, revered one. The echoes, they are loud. They are never loud," Darnak replies. "The voices of the dead are only ever as loud as the living allow them to be. If you hear them clearly, it is because you are finally quiet enough." He turns his head slightly. The chapel's lumen strips are slung low and hooded. Shadows crawl over the chaplain's skull-helmed visage like living things, slipping in and out of the carved sockets and nasal cavity. For a moment, his face might as well be another of the shrines set into the wall. "You wish to understand," he says, "what we are, who hears these echoes, why the Imperium sends us again and again to stand upon the threshold of its graves. Yes, revered one." Darnak's grip tightens around the Crozius haft. "We are the Star Phantoms," he says. "We are the sons of a founding that has had its name ground down by time. Administratum scribes call it the Sentinel Founding, raised in an age when the borders of the Imperium burned and the dead outnumbered the living on half its worlds. We were not made to be bright heralds or crusading redeemers. We were forged to hold the edges of a failing empire, to watch the lights go out one by one and record the manner of each extinction." He tastes old ash under his tongue as he speaks. Memory always carries the flavors of the worlds they have watched die. "The records name no sire for our line," he continues. "The gene vaults that birthed us were sealed by those who wore the sigil of the High Lords in another age, their reasons locked behind the sigils of their own fear. Some whisper that we are shards of the First Legion, culled and cloaked and cast into the dark so that we might die alone if their secrets ever came to light. The sons of the Lion deny this. We deny this. Blood does not matter. Only the tally of the dead matters." He hears other voices in the chapel now, not only the recorded whispers of the fallen. A Lord Admiral cursing them behind sealed hatches for burning his advance regiments in the same furnace as the Orc hordes that had broken them. A scarred Lord General of the Astra Militarum, jaw clenched as Star Phantom bombardment washes over his own lines because the enemy has pressed too close. A soft-voiced Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus, lips moving in prayer as she reviews the ledger of worlds cleansed and notes how often the victorious casualty lists outnumber those of the defeated. Darnak has stood before commanders of the Imperial Guard whose eyes never quite met his gaze, as if to look at the hourglass sigil on his shoulder was to admit that they too were only waiting for their sand to run out. "They think us butchers," he says, "unruly, difficult to command. They are not wrong. We are not their knights. We are not their champions. We are their executioners." He steps away from the altar, skull helm turning to take in the kneeling forms of the assembled brothers. "Look at them, neophyte. These are not angels in the manner the ecclesiarchy paints upon its walls. These are ledger keepers. Each one carries the weight of every death his hands have wrought. Each one carries files of bone and ash, not as trophies, but as proof that his duty has been discharged." The neophyte raises his head despite himself. He looks along the rows of grey armor, across the bowed helms and the hourglass badges, and he shivers in his ceramite. There is a stillness to the veterans that makes them seem carved from stone. Their bolt pistols and chainswords hang at their hips like sacrificial instruments waiting for the next altar. "Imperator Mortifex," Darnak intones, letting the ritual title roll out over the hall. "You who rule in death. You who weigh each soul in the hollow of your hand and cast it down into oubliette, or elevation. He is the emperor you will know in truth. Initiate. Not the golden warrior of the Ministerum's gaudy pick screens, but the silent judge, who sits upon a throne of ghosts and breathes in the ashes of his subjects. We do not ask his blessing for our lives. We ask his acceptance of our deaths." He taps the Crozius lightly once against the deck. The sound is sharp, carrying through the drumbeat and the drone of the Vox shrines. Life is the moment before the verdict, he says, a breath drawn in before it is expelled, a grain of sand poised upon the lip of the glass. The Imperium teaches that only in death does duty end. We know this to be false. Only in death does duty begin. Only when a life is measured and found wanting or sufficient does it have meaning. We wage war so that as many as possible may face that judgment. The censer smoke thickens around him. In its grey coils, Darnac sees the outlines of worlds and campaigns, their names etched into the inner surfaces of his skull like script. Hakanth, he says, tasting the word. A shrine world. Its mountains hollowed into mausolea, chosen as our first home. We raised walls around the bones of saints and lashed ourselves to the sides of ossuaries. We learned to move through the dark by feel, our hands upon carved epitaphs centuries old. It was there that we came fully into the service of the Judge of the Dead. The images shift. He sees vaulted reliquary halls bursting apart as something unseen pulls at the threads of time, rock liquefying and flowing like wax, battle brothers aging to dust in the space of a heartbeat while orc hulks burn in the sky above. He hears again the roar of a temporal storm and the keening of a migration of Hrud as they fold the world into their entropy. We will speak of Hakanth, he tells the neophyte, and of the days when our home was devoured. We will speak of the Hrud and their war against the very concept of time, and how we fled that feasting with only a fragment of our strength intact. The smoke becomes the jagged silhouette of fortress lines under alien skies. The roar of drums recalls macro cannon and artillery. The skull helms in the walls seem for a heartbeat to shout over each other. We will speak of a fortress world named Cormag, where we broke a Xenos siege that had lasted longer than most mortal bloodlines, and then turned our guns upon the men we had come to save, because corruption had already eaten their souls. We will speak of the crusade of Lord Solar Macarius, when we fought in the shadow of his banners and were judged unfit to stand near mortal lines because we sent as many of them to the judge as we did the enemy. He steps slowly along the nave, the neophyte's gaze following. Each name he speaks leaves an after-image in the air, a ghost of a battlefield pressed into the incense. We will speak of the wars that came after the Lord Solar's death, when the sectors he had taken tore themselves apart, and we were ordered to unmake what we had helped conquer. We will speak of the day our fire tore another chapter's ships from the sky, and of the Inquisitors who came to ask whether we had strayed from the light, only to find that our fanaticism burned brighter than their doubts. The ghosts of a world wreathed in flame rise in the smoke, crowned by a throne palace encased in thorns of metal and shield lightning. The echo of Titan's steps thrums through the deck beneath Darnac's boots, though he knows it is only memory. We will speak of Badab, the chaplain murmurs, and of the tyrant who thought himself master of a stolen realm. We will speak of the ice moon Jaga, where his palace's corpse was given to us as prize, and of how we buried the memento mori in glacier rock to make of it a fortress monastery and a tomb. We will speak of the Carthago crusade and of the agri-world called Kerak, where the fields drank so much blood that the soil would not take seed for a decade. He comes to a halt beside the neophyte, Crozius held with the head turned downward, twin skulls staring the youth in the eyes. We will not speak of victories as the administratum measures them, he says quietly. That is for scribes and adepts. We will not speak of glory as the ecclesiarchy defines it. That is for picked screens and lies. We will speak of cost, of what was lost, of the way every triumph left a wound that never fully closed. The initiate swallows. His tongue feels thick, his heart's slow and heavy. Revered one, he ventures, is there nothing worth the price? Darnac's skull helm turns slightly, as if the carved bone is regarding him from some great distance. The judge decides worth, he says. You and I decide only who will stand before him and when. This is a dead empire that refuses to lie down. Its arteries are clogged with the corpses of those it has spent to remain upright. We are scalpels in a hand that trembles. We cut away rot, but every cut spills more life. He raises the Crozius and slams its base against the deck. The sound cracks through the chapel. Remember this, he says. The Imperium will call on you and your brothers, again and again, to tidy its catastrophes. It will name you angels of death and praise you in the same breath that it hides the casualty ledgers. We do not fight for its praise. We fight to ensure that when the last record is closed, the judge will see that we did not look away. The sensor engines begin to withdraw, chains rattling as they reverse along their tracks. The recorded voices in the skull shrines fade one by one, each cutting off mid-word or mid-scream, replaced by the low hum of the ship's engines throbbing through the bones of the old barge. Dismissed, Darnak says. The veterans rise in unison, armor servos whining softly. They file from the Hall of Echoes in 2s and 3s, boots ringing on the deck, each carrying their private reliquaries and their own catalogues of the dead. The neophyte remains kneeling until the last of them has gone. Only when the doors hiss shut does he move. He reaches to his belt and unclips a small iron file. Inside, a pinch of grey dust shifts like the finest sand in the galaxy. His hands shake only a little as he unscrews the cap and tips a measure onto the hourglass painted on his pauldron. With the edge of his thumb, he begins to work it in, grinding bone into paint, paint into ceramite, until the sigil takes on the faint roughness that marks all true star phantoms. He does not yet have many names to whisper. A few Xenos from a boarding action fought under the watch of his sergeant. 2 fellow initiates who failed the implantation rites and whose bodies were rendered down and placed in the fortress ossuaries. 1 mortal serf who threw himself in front of a malfunctioning plasma coil to save a squad. He breathes their names into the vox bead at his throat, letting the helm pick them up and send them into the chapel's hungry silence. His voice trembles, but does not break. Beyond the walls, Jaga's storms claw and scream at the Memento Mori's frozen flanks. Somewhere deeper in the ship, a klaxon coughs into life, its tone low and insistent. On some bridge deep in the fortress hull, red runes will be blooming across hololithic displays, drop pod deployment sigils winking to readiness as the machine spirits wake. The neophyte keeps polishing until the bone dust is gone, and the hourglass feels properly rough beneath his touch. Then he rises, turns towards the looming doors, and walks to meet the next name that will be added to his list. The drop pod is a coffin of steel and fire. Harnesses bite into ceramite as retro thrusters howl and scream. The walls shudder, heat bleeding through the layered plates with a low, hungry crackle. Dust falls from the seams in fine grey curtains. Somewhere above, the pod's outer casing, is a comet tearing through the upper atmosphere of yet another forgettable world. Somewhere below, the Star Phantom's target waits like a patient corpse on a slab. The neophyte hangs in his restraints, hearts pounding in his twin ribcages, and thinks about tombs. He thinks about the Hall of Echoes, about the chaplain's skull-helmed silhouette wreathed in incense, about the promise of stories that were really autopsies. Hakanth, Sakura, wars against things that no longer have names. We are not their knights, the chaplain had said. We are their executioners. The pod judders again, hard, as it bites deeper into the sky. Warning sigils crawl along the inside of the hatch like restless spirits. The initiate's armor hums, stabilizer gyros fighting the violence of descent. There is no room to move, no room to breathe a prayer without tasting the hot stink of oil and metal and recirculated air. In that clenched silence, the neophyte remembers Darnak's voice when he had first spoken of their birth. The edict had gone out from Terra in an age that was already sinking under the weight of its own dead. The High Lords had sat beneath the dust-choked vaults of the Senatorum Imperialis and listened to petitions and casualty reports until the words blurred into a single, endless drone. Border sectors burned, expansion fleets starved, whole swathes of the Imperium's frontier had become graveyards of lost colonies and silenced beacons. The 23rd Great Founding did not emerge from hope. It spilled out of fear and exhaustion and the sullen, grinding need to hold what the Imperium already had, while everything beyond its borders howled and clawed at the walls. They named it the Sentinel Founding. Under that title, new gene vaults groaned open. Stasis-locked genocide from forgotten campaigns was thawed on cold forges. Apothecaries and magos biologists spoke of purity and viability, while around them, administratum officials argued over charts flecked with ink and dried blood. Which sectors were failing fastest? Which worlds could still be declared worth saving? Which lines could be held, and which would simply be written off and left to die? When the scribes dipped their pens into the ink, they did not think in terms of legends and saints. They thought in terms of numbers, in casualty projections and harvest yields, and lifetimes of tithed soldiers. They thought of fleets bled white and regiments fed into alien moors. When they ordered new chapters raised, it was not as banners for glorious crusades, but as plugs for the holes in a leaking dam. The star phantoms were charted to a scar on the galactic map known as the Sakara sector. There had been a different title there once, some pious string of syllables invoking an imperial saint. By the time the founding writs were inked, the name had been eroded by centuries of horror. Administratum cartographs marked it only as a place ravaged by wars against nameless Xenos monstrosities, a cluster of systems where the bulk of imperial presence had been reduced to isolated forts and a few stubborn shrine worlds clinging like barnacles to the flanks of dead suns. From the start, the Star Phantoms were given a task no sane mind would call enviable. They were to take root at the edge of a devastated sector and hold. They were to stave off whatever still crawled through the ruins, with little expectation of relief and less of praise. They were to watch the grave and make sure that whatever lay within did not climb back out. For a home, the High Lords gave them Hakanth. It was a shrine world, in the way that infected wounds sometimes earned the title of interesting from jaded chirurgeons. Hakanth had once been a pilgrimage point for pious souls across 3 subsectors. Its mountains had been hollowed out by generations of ecclesiarchy labourers, their stone bellies carved into cathedra and reliquary halls, ossuaries and charnel vaults. Rail lines bored through the bedrock linked peak to peak, hauling caskets and bone-filled reliquaries between sanctuaries with the regularity of a heartbeat. By the time the Star Phantoms came, the pilgrims were gone. War and plague and simple disinterest had emptied the processional routes. The ecclesiarchy had withdrawn its choirs and its cardinals, leaving behind only minor orders and stubborn planetary clergy. The mountains remained, their hollow insides stacked with the bones of saints and martyrs, and a great number of nameless faithful whose names had been lost when their shrines burned. The new chapter's ships fell from the sky like crows onto a corpse. Strike cruisers bled retro fire above the mountains, venting atmosphere and re-entry flame as they settled into orbit. Orbital augurs swept over the planetary surface, tracing out lines of old pilgrim routes, identifying surviving bastions and silenced shrines. Tech marines walked the decks of half-finished battle barges, chanting Binharic canticles to machine spirits that had yet to fire their first macro volley. When the Star Phantoms came down, they did not claim a city or raise a fresh fortress from virgin stone. They chose a mausoleum massif, already older than some hive worlds, a vast conglomeration of tombs, fused together by centuries of expansion into a single swollen mountain of stone and bone. Its outer face was lined with stacked colonnades and balconies, each one choked with statues of saints and silenced bells. Within, the galleries and ossuaries plunged deep, a maze of catacombs that wormed down to the planetary crust. The first work parties of Astartes, fresh from implantation and indoctrination, moved through those depths in silence. Their bootfalls rang off the bones of nobles and martyrs. Purity seals older than their gene line rustled in the air currents behind them. They tore down some walls and reinforced others, cutting new prayer halls and arming bays into the sides of tomb galleries, bolting gun ports into devotional alcoves, turning reliquary halls into armories. Cells were carved off from ossuary corridors, their walls still bearing the carved epitaphs of the dead that had once lain behind them. The fortress monastery that grew within Hakanth's mountain was not a new structure. It was a malignant growth threaded through an existing carcass. The first recruits were taken from the worlds that still orbited Saqqara's dying sun and the nearby systems that had not yet fallen into total barbarism. Barbarism is a generous word. The human remnants stumbled over battlefields that had never healed, living in the ruins of manufactoria and shrines, their cultures twisted around remnants of imperial iconography and the threat of whatever still lurked beyond the stars. They had forgotten the high Gothic of the ecclesiarchy hymns, but they remembered that skulls were holy and that fire burned more than just flesh. The star phantoms came to them in armor, the color of dust and milked hatred. They took the strongest youths from ash-choked plains and cavern warrens, from rusted hive carcasses and feral shrine cities, and brought them up to the mausoleum massifs of Hakanth. The neophyte's first duty was not to learn the bolter or chainsword. It was to learn the weight of the dead. They were set to work in the ossuary galleries, their mortal muscles straining under the mass of relic caskets and bone-packed reliquaries. They learned to recarve cracked epitaphs, to clean the yellowed bone of saints with cloth soaked in sanctified oils, to rebuild collapsed niches and shore up failing pillars. They stood the long, still watches in the outer tomb halls, with shotguns and shock mauls, guarding the inert remains of those whose sacrifices had funded the world's sanctity. Sleep came in narrow, cell-like barracks cut into the walls of the mausoleum corridors, where the smell of old dust and dried marrow seeped through the stone. Rations were eaten beneath the blank stares of skull-lined walls. Instruction came from chaplains, whose voices echoed through bone chambers, speaking of duty and martyrdom, and the emperor as judge of the dead. By the time their bodies were reforged into Astartes, those initiates had already spent mortal years in tombs. Their first memories of duty were the brittle creak of old bones under their hands, and the knowledge that their own remains would one day join the ranks they guarded. Outside, the wars never stopped. The horrors that stalked the wounded Saqqara sector did not care about the sanctity of shrine worlds. Phage fleets slipped out of ruined warp routes, their hulls scarred by radiation and studded with stolen imperial architecture. Things with too many limbs and not enough faces clawed their way out of long, dormant stasis vaults. Hive fleets of unknown origin salivated against the edges of the mapped void, their feeder tendrils snapping at human worlds like vermin around a corpse. The star phantoms met them as they had been designed to, from a distance and with overwhelming force. Their strike cruisers fanned out from Hakanth in spearhead formations, prow rams cutting through gas clouds still streaked with the frozen remains of long-dead battles. Their weapon batteries sang in the void, hurling shells and lances into the ragged silhouettes of Xenos warships until the aliens bled air and bodies and broken machinery in tumbling, burning arcs. On the ground, they did not wage war like liberators. They waged war like surgeons called to a limb that had already gone black. When an infested world was found, they did not waste time on speeches or parades. Drop pods howled through the skies in their hundreds, trailing fire and vaporized cloud. Deathstorm pods fell with them, their doors slamming open on impact to let loose auto-loading racks of missile racks and heavy bolters that slewed and tracked and reaped everything that moved within their assigned fields of fire. Devastator squads went to ground in choke points and killing fields, their heavy weapons roaring. Their battle companies were arranged along broadly codex lines, but each one held 3 full Devastator squads instead of 2. The extra firepower was not an affectation, it was a necessity. The worlds they fought on did not yield to careful blade work. They had to be scoured. Vindicators rumbled through corpse-choked streets, dozer blades pushing aside mangled bodies and vehicle wrecks as their demolisher cannons punched craters into alien redoubts. Land raiders crawled up hills, slick with blood and offal, fortress hulls shrugging off small arms and spore cannon fire alike, Lascannons spitting to swat down the hulking silhouettes of war beasts. Tactical squads moved behind the iron beasts' sheltering bulk, bolters on full auto, armor splashed and streaked with the residue of things that had never been human. On some worlds, they fought things that the Ordo Xenos would later declare extinct. On others, they fought species so warped by exposure to the warp that no one ever knew what they had been before they became meat puppets for demonic hunger. The Star Phantoms did not bother with names. They recorded grid coordinates, casualty numbers, ammunition expenditure, and the precise duration of each engagement. The enemy went into the ledger as one more entry in a column of eradicated threats. Liberation was a word that did not appear often in their campaign records. There were times when imperial banners were raised over shattered cathedra, and the surviving population of some battered hive cheered hoarsely as ash-white giants marched through their streets. More often, the cheering choked off when the same giants turned their guns on the hab blocks and the refuge tunnels where taint had taken root. Sometimes the taint was obvious: warp growths, visible mutations, open shrines to things that were not the Emperor. Sometimes it was invisible, lodged in the soul like a splinter. The mortuary chaplains decreed that the risk was too great. Exterminatio followed in the wake of liberation. Cities were burned not once but twice. Populations that had survived centuries of horror were thinned out in nights of sanctioned slaughter. In orbit, servitors logged the casualty figures and stamped them with the sigils of compliance and success. Within a few decades of their founding, the Star Phantoms doctrine had solidified into something colder than most among the Adeptus Astartes were willing to admit. They adhered to the Codex in broad strokes. 10 companies, each with its captain and standard, and its own fragment of the chapter's history engraved on its armor. Scout formations of mortal-born initiates. Tactical, assault, and devastator squads, each filling the roles laid down in the scriptures of Guilliman. At a glance, they were familiar. Another of the Imperium's endless tide of sons, born from the gene forges of terror. The differences lived in the details. 3 devastator squads per battle company, not 2. Armories that skewed heavily towards plasma and melter. Weapons that turned flesh and bone and armor alike into vapor or slag. An unusually high concentration of siege tanks and breacher vehicles in their motor pools. Drop pod reserve large enough to blanket a continent when fully deployed. The war engines of the Star Phantoms were chosen and maintained and deployed with a single, unshakable principle in mind. When the judge of the dead called for a world's account to be settled, it had to be settled quickly and without mercy. Each hourglass badge painted on the shoulder of a battle brother was more than a mark of heraldry. It was a diagram of the universe as the chapter understood it. The upper skull was the realm of the living, grinning, empty-eyed, its hollows filled with the noise and light of fleeting lives. The narrow throat of the glass was the moment of ending, the instant when breath left the lungs and the heart stopped, and the soul, if soul there was, tumbled out into the hollow below. The lower skull was the dead, silent and still, their numbers always rising, their patience endless. The band joining the brows symbolized the emperor as Imperator Mortifex, his gaze fixed on both realms at once, weighing, measuring, judging. Neophytes learned to trace that symbol with their thumbs when they woke and when they slept. They learned to feel for the faint roughness left by bone dust worked into the paint. They learned that every grain of that dust represented a life ended by their hand or their brother's hands, and that this was not a shame, but a tithe. It is a simple truth. Darnak had told the initiates in the halls beneath Hakanth that the living are always fewer than the dead. The living are an anomaly, a brief deviation from the proper state of stillness. Every battle we fight restores the proper balance. We are not here to preserve life. We are here to ensure that when life ends, it ends in service. The proximity of the shrine world's ossuaries only sharpened that belief. Every corridor was lined with skulls. Every stairwell passed by naves piled high with bones and reliquary caskets. Chanting never entirely stopped in the monastery. Choir. Servitors dragged on ruined lungs in the vaults, recycling the same hymns day after day, their voices fraying slowly over the centuries as circuitry and flesh failed. The smell of sanctified oil and preserved marrow was as constant as the hum of the power generators. When the Star Phantoms returned from campaign, they did not celebrate. They unloaded their dead first, bearing the armored bodies down into the mountain, laying them out upon slabs carved from stone, taken from St. Tombs. They stripped the fallen of flesh and organs and armor, cleaned bone and carved sigils into it, then placed the remains in niches beside the ancient imperial dead. Only when that was done did they clean their weapons and armor. Loss became ritual. Ritual became doctrine. From the outside, to the cold eyes of the administratum, the pattern of their wars was simple. A world sent out a distress signal. A Star Phantom strike force arrived. Orbital auger logs showed a heavy bombardment, followed by massed drop pod insertions and the deployment of siege armor. Xenos or heretic forces were exterminated. Human casualties approached or exceeded those of the enemy. Survivors, if any, were reduced to a fraction of the original population, often resettled or folded into new garrison forces. A red-stamped sigil declared the threat neutralized. The ledger moved on. Closer in, to those who had seen the after-action carnage, a different picture formed. Time and again, Imperial commanders found themselves writing reports in which the words victory and massacre shared the same sentences. Regiments annihilated by friendly fire because the Star Phantoms refused to risk enemy infiltration. City sectors flattened by Vindicator barrages for the sake of clearing a single suspected cult enclave. Populations condemned to death because their proximity to the warp taint was deemed irredeemable, even when no outward sign of corruption could be found. The chapter did not see cruelty in such acts. They saw necessity. Hakanth, under their stewardship, became less a homeworld and more a rehearsal stage. The Mausoleum Mountain Fortress was a model of the galaxy as they believed it would end. Stone halls packed with bones, endless rows of skulls staring out over empty floors, the living reduced to a handful of armored figures moving in the spaces between sarcophagi. The chants that echoed through its depths were the same litanies they would one day speak over entire sectors. The torches that burned in its vaults were to them no different from the fires that would one day crawl across doomed continents. They walked those halls and knew, with the cold certainty of fanatics, that they were practicing. Every reliquary they cleaned, every ossuary they expanded, every bolt they fired into the skull of some nameless Xenos beast beyond the borders of the shrine world was part of a single, unending act. The Imperium, though it did not yet realize it, was dying by inches. The star, phantoms were learning how to bury it. Hakanth's sky burns for days before anyone on the surface understands why. The shrine world has seen storms before. Warp gales have howled at the edges of the Sakura marches since before the first bones were interred in its mountain tombs. Radiation squalls have swept in from the deep black, painting the upper atmosphere in trembling veils of corpse light. But this is different. The first signs are the falling stars. They streak across the firmament in ragged flocks, smearing the heavens with greasy, smoking trails. Pilgrims kneeling in the outer chapels lift their eyes from skull-lined walls and watch in uneasy silence as the lights multiply, as they break apart, as some gutter out and others swell into fat, tumbling cinders. No one recites the old litanies for warding off comets. There are no comets this close to the void's edge. There are only intruders. In orbit, the truth is obvious. Orc vessels lumber into the system from the dark between the stars. Bellowing their challenge, over every vox band they can force a signal through. They are freebooter warbands, clans that have fought each other to a standstill in the edge void, and now turn outward in search of something new to tear apart. Their ships are slabs of riveted armor and mismatched engines, bristling with guns that belch shells as large as small habs. Rocks tumble between them, hollowed asteroids packed with guns and greenskins and crude shielding. The first wave dies almost by accident. Hakanth's orbital minefields have slept for long years, their casket-like housings drifting in patient arcing lines around the shrine world, machine spirits dreaming in the quiet of the void. When the orc flotilla blunders into their kill zones, those machine spirits wake with sudden, vicious joy. Tens of thousands of minds flare to life. Proximity runes whine. Arming latches slam back. The cold is filled with new suns as the first chain of detonations rips across the path of the leading orc cruisers. Hull plates peel away. Keels buckle. Reactor cores rupture, spilling boiling plasma into the black, cooking whole decks of greenskins where they brawl and roar. The survivors answer with laughter and more thrust. They plow through the scattered wreckage of their own dead, guns thundering, strobing lances of stolen Eldar technology and jury-rigged macro cannon fire lashing out at any mine pattern that dares shine brighter than the rest. More fleets rush in behind, each fresh clan eager to outdo the others in reckless advance, and the minefields burn themselves down trying to kill them all. The battle that follows lasts for 60 solar days. On the first day, the star phantoms bring every ship they possess to full readiness. The battle barge Memento Mori turns her prow to the enemy and lights her great engines. Strike cruisers peel off from their moorings in Hakanth's high anchorages, their dorsal batteries cycling to hot as. Tech Marines chant Binharic litanies to half-wild machine spirits. Escort squadrons move out along assigned vectors, their captains speaking kill tallies into their throat mics with the air of men reciting prayers. By the third day, the void around the shrine world is a storm of shrapnel and fire. Orc warships go down in their hundreds, belching atmosphere and greenskin bodies into space. They die under broadsides from the Memento Mori and her sisters, under the stabbing beams of lance batteries, under the sudden boiling blossoms of plasma torpedoes that rip their guts open and spill their crude manufactoria into the night. Rocks are caught in the converging arcs of overlapping mine detonations and shattered into tumbling, jagged fragments. The greenskins do not care. They are tireless. They are vast. For every hulk that goes dark, two more shoulder into the line, coughing out fighter squadrons and crude assault boats. Boarding torpedoes crack open the hulls of those that make it. Within reach, ash-white giants spill into dimly lit orc corridors, bolt shells and flamer streams carving tunnels of pressure and gore through mobs of howling pirates. Chainswords roar in the cramped darkness. The decks run slick with blood, human and alien and indeterminate. Caliber heavy autocannons hammer from murder holes hacked into bulkheads, rounds whining off ceramite pauldrons and punching through servitor torsos. By the 20th day, debris has formed a loose ring around Hakanth, a belt of wreckage and frozen viscera. Fragments of orc vessels drift in tangled swarms, trailing spills of atmosphere and snapped power lines that spit tiny, futile sparks. Broken mines corkscrew among them, their housings split, their guts spent. The occasional Star Phantom escort limps through the field, hull plating crumpled and scorched, still firing, still killing. The chapter's fury is not hot. It is a cold, steady thing, as relentless and impersonal as the ticking of an hourglass. Hakanth is not simply a strategic asset. It is the mountain of bones at the heart of their cult, the reliquary that holds the remains of saints and martyrs and battle brothers alike. The idea of greenskin boots treading its ossuary halls is not merely offensive, it is blasphemy. They pour fire into the void until gun barrels glow. Macro cannon crews collapse at their stations and are replaced by fresh servitors and labour thralls. Tech Marines strip parts from damaged vessels and weld them into makeshift repairs mid-battle. Their mechadendrites slick with oil and the blood of those too slow to get out of the way. Their captains stand on their command decks, surrounded by a haze of fumes and the harsh cry of Auspex runes, eyes locked to hololithic displays, crawling with red and green and the blinking blue of their own dwindling forces. They do not open vox channels to the orcs. They do not trade insults. They answer every threat with more ammunition. On the 40th day, the greenskins begin to falter. Even orc numbers have limits. Even their crude industrial might cannot sustain loss without respite. The strongest warships are hulks now, drifting carcasses picked over by scavenger drones, and enterprising freebooter gun crews looking to strip one last cannon from a rival's flank. The rocks are pitted and cracked, their outer layers chipped away by mine blasts and torpedo impacts. Kill tallies carved into armor rise towards numbers that would make other chapters ashamed. The Star Phantoms carve their tallies anyway, bone dust black beneath fresh scribing. The orcs do not break cleanly. There is no sudden rout. There is only a gradual lessening of pressure, a subtle change in the rhythm of incoming fire. The greenskin admirals, whatever passes for such things among freebooters, begin to pull their larger vessels back towards the edge of the system, taking their best guns and their largest mobs with them. The weakest and most damaged ships are left. Behind is a screen, still firing, still advancing, feral scraps too stupid or too proud to fall away. It is on the 59th day that the true threat arrives. At first, the augur returns look like another wave of orc reinforcements. Massive smeared shapes register at the very edge of the system, where the void thins and the subtle scars of the warp's touch become more pronounced. The machine spirits of Hakanth's defense platforms howl in sudden rage and fear, their logic engines flickering through endless scrolls of half-remembered warning runes. Then the shapes resolve, and the Star Phantoms witness something they have no proper catechisms for. A wound opens in the star-flecked dark. It does not tear along the crude, jagged lines of a typical warp breach. It rolls, slowly, like a black wave, its leading edge folding and refolding upon itself. Stars behind it seem to shudder and smear, their light dragged sideways, as if the fabric of reality is being drawn out of true. Vox signals passing through that region of space arrive seconds early or centuries late, fractured into disjointed bursts. At its forefront move shadows. They are not the simple absence of light cast by solid objects. They are absences that eat the light itself, shapes that seem to exist half in the eye and half in the moment after the eye has closed. They slither through the void in ragged clots, clinging to the edges of the wave of disruption. Rude. The word passes along the chapter's data links and vox channels like a curse. Old data slates speak of them, ghosts in the records, vermin in the walls of the galaxy, migrations of entropic life that hollow out systems and leave only husks behind. They do not march like invading armies. They swarm through reality like a disease. Time begins to break. The first sign is the minefields. Many of the mines are already spent, their housings drifting like dead insect shells. But some remain dormant, unexploded, waiting for targets that have not yet or will never come. Those mines begin to age. Ceramite casings crack. Firing caps crumble to useless dust. Charging coils corrode in the space of heartbeats, the metal visibly flaking and sloughing away. Others are thrown backwards, their surfaces smoothing, their machine spirits regressing to factory state, forgetting targeting data, forgetting blessings. Blank slates in the moment before their first breath of power. Ships are next. Orc hulks caught at the fringes of the wave curdle. Plates rust, then flake away entirely. Gun barrels bend like soft wax. Crew die screaming as their flesh melts from their bones or as their teeth collapse into powder in their jaws. Some spit jets of growth instead, their hulls sprouting new armor plates and spines in grotesque, cancerous blooms, only to blacken and slough off moments later. Even the proud lines of Imperial cruisers are not immune. Flotillas stationed close to the edge of engagement begin to sag and twist. Sensor, spires made from alloys designed to endure millennia, crumble to junk in the span of a single transmission. Engines cough out gouts of smoke that smell of ancient ozone and infant hydrogen in alternating waves, as if whole epochs of their existence are being forced through in accelerated flashes. Hakanth feels it last and worst. On the shrine world, where the dead lie stacked in mountains and the living move like ghosts among them, the laws that hold cause and effect together start to die. A pilgrim acolyte kneeling in a minor chapel looks up at the tremor that runs through the stone. The candle in his hand gutters, flares, and becomes a bare wick again. The wax runs up the side of the stick and solidifies, then carves its way back down, then vanishes. The bones in the walls behind him yellow, whiten, darken, split. Names carved into the plaques over the niches blur and shift, letters jumbling themselves into nonsense and then snapping back. The ossuary's age, stone pillars bow and crack as centuries run their full course in minutes, weight and stress, building and releasing in mad, overlapping cycles. Frescoed saints with upraised swords peel and fade, then glow with the brightness of freshly laid paint before blistering into unreadable smears. Silver reliquaries tarnish into black lumps, then gleam with new polish, then collapse into unrecognizable dross. Humans do not fare any better. Some die in an instant. Their hair goes white, their skin spots and wrinkling, their backs bowing before their hearts simply give up. Others snap back into childhood, armor and clothing hanging in absurd folds around shriveled forms before they collapse into raw, unformed masses that do not live long enough to scream. A few flicker between states, decades rising and falling on them like waves, bones swelling and shrinking, organs growing and failing, until something inside simply unravels. Even the Adeptus Astartes are not immune. Battle brothers on the outer bastions feel their armor plates groan and shift, growing new battle scars and losing old ones in dizzying succession. A veteran sergeant with 3 centuries of service feels youth surge back through his limbs for a heartbeat, the old aches vanishing, the scars across his chest smoothing, his vision sharpening. In the next breath, his joints fuse, his hands wither, and his secondary heart bursts like rotten fruit inside his chest cavity. Others are thrown in the other direction, their implants and reinforced bones surging into overdrive, muscles bulking, senses widening, only to collapse under the strain as organs age beyond the ken of apothecaries. In the command sanctum of the Memento Mori, Chapter Master Omadon Tiresias watches the augur returns fracture on the hololith. His armor is old, its ash-white plates inscribed with campaigns that no longer appear on most imperial star charts. The hourglass on his shoulder bears the dark stain of bone dust countless times renewed. His helm sits on a plinth beside the command throne. Its lens is dark, its vox grille scarred by a melter blast from some long-dead alien. His bare skull is marked with fine script, mortuary litanies inked into the skin around his eyes and down along his jaw. He has seen monsters the galaxy has forgotten. He has walked through hives where the walls themselves tried to eat him, across worlds that bled light from their soil. He has never seen this. The hololithic display shows the shrewd migration rolling inward like a black tide. Orc icons flicker and die as the green-skinned ships are caught and torn apart by forces no gun can answer. Imperial runes stutter and smear. Vox feeds from the surface crackle with nonsense bursts. Whole sentences flensed of verbs, names stripped of consonants. The time codes stamped in the corner of each reading spin and jitter, jumping backwards and forwards in short, maddening loops. He knows, with one cold, glass-hard moment of clarity, that this is not a war he can win. If he keeps his chapter here, they will not die as martyrs. They will dissolve. Their gene seed will rot in their chests. Their bones will crumble before the apothecaries can reclaim them. Their fortress monastery will age into dust, or flicker out of existence in half-built fragments. Hakanth will not become a last stand. It will become a parody of one. He speaks his orders without raising his voice. Relics first. Ossuary vaults numbered and triaged. The most sacred caskets and saint bones brought up from the depths to the embarkation decks. Dreadnought sarcophagi unshackled from their chapel alcoves and loaded into drop bays. Gene seed stock stripped from the apothecarian, phials and stasis caskets, and entire racks of progenoid organs marched aboard the Memento Mori and the few remaining cruisers that are still structurally sound. The order to withdraw goes out in a flat burst of encoded Binharic and High Gothic. It carries the seal of the chapter master and the blessing of the mortuary chaplains. It is not couched in rhetoric. It does not speak of retreat. It speaks of preservation, of duty beyond death, of the need to carry the chapter's soul out of the falling time storm so that it can continue to feed the judge's ledger elsewhere. Not everyone accepts it. On the outer bastions, squads still locked in combat, with the ragged remnants of the orc boarding parties, laugh hoarsely when the withdrawal rune flashes on their helm displays. Some cut their vox links entirely. Others simply ignore the signal and wade deeper into the fight, bolters snarling, chain blades vomiting teeth and blood. If the world is ending, they reason, then there is no more fitting place to fall than on the ramparts of the ossuaries they swore to defend. In the catacombs, whole units make a different choice. Veteran brothers in armor, older than many imperial states, march down, not up, when they receive the recall order. They move into the deepest tomb halls, into corridors, packed so tightly with skulls that their pauldrons scrape bone on either side. They seal bulkheads behind them. They kneel before the oldest shrines and lay their weapons on the floor, hands resting on their knees, helms tilted back to expose their scarified faces to the shifting light. Some recite litanies, others simply close their eyes and wait. Later, when the chapter speaks of those days, those brothers will become more than deserters. They will be absolved. Their refusal to flee will be cast as the purest expression of doctrine. To die with one's watchtower is the highest form of service to the judge. No one will record the crack in Omadon Tiresias' voice when he realizes how many vox channels have gone permanently silent. The evacuation is chaos measured in ritual. Hakanth's higher peaks buckle and slump as time digs its claws in. Fissures open like yawning mouths along the flanks of the mausoleum mountains, spilling skulls and carved reliquary stones in glittering avalanches. Whole chapels disintegrate, their walls turning to sand that spills into the catacombs below. Others revert to half-finished states, scaffolding flickering into existence around them. Stunned labor thralls caught mid-movement before they are scrubbed away by the next fluctuation. Through it all, lines of ash-white armor move with grim purpose. Servitors haul grav sledges loaded with sealed caskets and shrines towards the embarkation points. Battle brothers stride alongside, gauntleted hands steady on the loads, occasionally lifting a piece of fallen stone and setting it back onto its plinth, even as the ceiling over their heads ages into dust. Chaplains stand in widened doorways roaring final blessings, Crozius heads hammering dents into decks that may never exist long enough to remember the blows. The memento mori becomes a lifeboat and an ark. Tech marines work the docking clamps with frantic care, recalibrating maglocks as the ship's own hull plating warps and shifts under their feet. The battle barge's machine spirit howls in its nested cogitators at the strain, its sense of its own chronology shredded by the temporal storm gnawing at its flanks. It remembers firing broadsides in another war, in another century. It anticipates weapons it has not yet been refitted with. It hears voices on the Vox from crewmen not yet born. The red-robed adepts soothe it with prayers and fresh diagnostics, feeding it streams of pure data culled from the few relatively stable augurs left. When the last loads are aboard that can be salvaged, Omadon Tiresias orders the disentangling. Anchor lines blow free from their sockets, explosive bolts punching them away from the hull. Docking bridges retract, snapping like brittle twigs as time runs the length of their spines and ages them into uselessness mid-movement. The memento mori's main drives flare, petals of plasma opening like a flower at the stern, pushing the ship up and away from the shrinking island of stability around Hakanth. The warp rift rolls inward. It is closer now, filling the hololith, the shadows riding its front swell as they feed, their bodies composed of overlapping probabilities and parasitic timelines. They are not creatures that can be fought with torpedoes and lance fire. Attempted bombardments simply dissolve as their shells pass through pockets of accelerated entropy and crumble into dust. Some of the chapter's lesser vessels never make it out. Escort frigates caught too close to the wave's edge flicker in and out of existence, their hulls elongating and shortening, their mass redistribution tearing them apart. A strike cruiser's prow ages a millennium in a heartbeat, its armor plates collapsing, crew dying screaming as atmosphere rots in their lungs, while its stern surges forward in time, reactors pushing towards overload in seconds, designed to take decades. The resulting detonation is both blinding and oddly slow, the plasma plume swelling and shrinking in uneven pulses. The memento mori takes wounds as it drags itself free. Sections of her outer armor buckle and fall away as the storm's edge brushes them. Some decks age into ruin, corridors collapsing, shrines imploding, crew turning to desiccated husks mid-step. Other decks vanish entirely, the compartments that should be there simply not existing for a few mad heartbeats before half-formed replacements grow in their place. A few patches of corridor revert to their maker's marks, bare hull with chalk lines and auspex readings scrawled along it, work cogitators ticking through old calculations before the present reasserts itself. The command sanctum is not spared. A stray eddy of warped time spears through the shielded walls like a lance of invisible ice. It passes through cogitator banks that blossom into rust flowers, through servitors that shrivel into meat jerky on the bone, through Omadon Tiresias' skull. For a moment he is back on a world he has not thought of in centuries, the sky above him full of cinder ash and the silhouette of a Xenos war engine framed in lightning. For another heartbeat, he is a neophyte standing in an ossuary on Hakanth, hands shaking around the weight of his first bolter. Then he is in his command throne again, except his eyes no longer work. Agony kills the scream in his throat before it fully forms. His vision whites out, then goes black, not with the static of shut-down augurs, but with the flat finality of burnt flesh. He smells his own seared corneas, feels the skin around his sockets crack and char. The pain is almost a relief, something he can cling to that belongs to him alone and not to the twisting, collapsing fabric of reality around him. He does not fall. He grips the arms of his throne until ceramite creaks and continues to give orders. The memento mori bucks and shudders like a wounded beast. Its engines howl. Its prow cuts through regions of space where the rules of mass and distance have begun to fray. Bit by bit, thruster burn by thruster burn, it drags itself out of the worst of the storm. Behind it, Hakanth dies. From the shelter of the battle barge's damaged observation galleries, those with functional auspex and eyes watch the shrine world's final moments. The mausoleum mountains warp and twist, their peaks elongating, then snapping like brittle spears. Whole ranges sag into molten slurry, then refreeze in jagged, unnatural shapes. Oceans flash boil, then vanish, leaving behind cracked basins that age through a dozen cycles of erosion in moments. For a heartbeat, the world looks young, its scars smoothed away, its atmosphere clear and bright. In the next, it is an ancient ruin, crust split in spiderweb fissures, its orbital path littered with the frozen remnants of its own disemboweled mantle. Then the storm folds around it completely, and there is only darkness. When the memento mori finally limps clear of the Hrud migration's current, little. More than a third of the chapter remains aboard. The casualty lists run to thousands of names. Entire companies are gone, their banners left hanging in halls that no longer exist. The gene seed vaults are intact, but badly depleted. The relic shrines salvaged from Hakanth's depths take up whole decks, their presence a weight on the ship's spine, an accusation in carved stone and bone. The Saqqara sector behind them is not merely lost, it is erased. Astropathic choirs that cast their minds back towards Hakanth find only a buzzing void, a region of space where signals go to die. Navigators studying the swirling currents of the warp see a permanent bruise forming there, a knot of bad water where the Hrud migration and the temporal rupture have torn things too badly to ever fully heal. Imperial charts are updated, ink smeared over the sector's name, fresh ward symbols annotated in the margins. The star phantoms have no world to return to. They become fleet-bound exiles by necessity. The memento mori is no longer merely a warship. She is a monastery, an ossuary, a home. Her decks are renamed for Hakanth's lost mountain shrines. Her chapel vaults are expanded, swallowing cargo bays and training halls, making more room for the bones and the caskets and the skulls. Every corridor is inscribed with some fragment of the shrine world's memory, some line of scripture or list of the fallen. Rituals shift. Where once the chapter's litanies had spoken of guarding a world, now they speak of remembering one. The mortuary cult leans harder into its fixation on absence. The emperor, as Imperator Mortifex, becomes not only the judge of the dead, but the keeper of things that no longer exist. The hourglass sigil takes on a new layer of meaning. The upper skull is Hakanth as it was. The lower skull is Hakanth as it is now. Gone, dissolved into story and scar tissue on the warp's surface. The brothers of the star phantoms carry bone dust from their lost mausoleum in tiny glass phials. They grind it into their armor alongside the remains of enemies. They speak Hakanth's name before every engagement, not as a plea for intercession, but as a reminder. They are no longer guardians of a shrine world. They are the sons of a world torn out of time, wanderers in a graveyard that has lost its central tomb. Every war they fight from this point on, every bombardment they order, every extermination they carry out, is weighed against the knowledge that worlds can be snuffed out not only by guns and fire, but by the casual passage of something older and more indifferent than any foe they can kill. The galaxy was always dying. Now, The star phantoms have watched a piece of its corpse dragged away into a darkness even they cannot catalogue. They will never forgive the universe for that. Cormag Secundus is a scar. From orbit, it does not look like a world. It looks like a wound gouged into the flank of creation and left to fester. The continents are scabbed over with ferrocrete, bastions and trench lines, and gun emplacements stretching in tangled lattices from horizon to horizon. Macro shell craters pockmark the plains in overlapping rings, their rims jagged and blackened, their throats filled with rusted wreckage and bones. The seas are grey, slick with the oils of 1,000 sunken fleets. The aurora that once danced over its poles has long since been drowned out by the dirty glow of flak bursts and the bruise-coloured halo of void shield reflections. For more than 2 centuries, Cormag Secundus has been under siege. The enemy is a species that should never have been allowed a name. Imperial tacticians call them crave marauders when they are forced to commit any description at all to parchment, but among the garrison they have become whispered monsters, ghosts that crawl in from the dark with minds like knives. The crave do not besiege in the way orcs or heretics do. Their ships slide into orbit in silence, pale hulls patterned with webbing that drinks the light of nearby stars. They do not broadcast demands. They do not blare threats. They spread their nest webs across the void, latticed structures of grown matter and phase-warped metal that hang in low orbit like strands of a spider's web, dripping pods and drones and parasite craft. Their weapons do not simply tear flesh, they tear thought. Men who stand too long under crave bombardment begin to mutter to themselves, words slurring as if their tongues have grown too thick for their mouths. Officers forget orders they gave moments before. Gunners lock their sights on targets and then drift away from the engagement entirely, staring into nothing while their hands twitch around firing studs that never depress. Prisoners taken alive babble in voices that are not their own, the words spilling out in broken reflections of those who question them. Cormag Secundus has held regardless. Fortress lines have fallen and reformed. Whole bastion complexes have been eaten away by shellfire and rebuilt atop their own wreckage. Regiments raised from the fortress world's own birth cohorts have lived and died along the same 50 leagues of trench, their great-grandchildren inheriting the same numbered bunkers and the same weak, state-issued recaf pots. Generals have grown old, staring at the same patch of warped sky where the Krav nest webs drift and glisten, their own minds slowly fraying under the constant psychic abrasion. The plea for aid that once left Cormag Secundus did so in the early days of the siege, when the fortress world's vox arrays still functioned as their makers intended, and its astropathic choir still had enough intact minds to scream across the void. By the time an answer comes, the petition is an artifact. Its words have become part of the world's liturgy, recited by trench priests alongside catechisms for fixed bayonets and properly aligned macro cannon. The answer comes in the form of ash, white hulls sliding out of the warp on lances of tortured light. Star Phantom strike cruisers emerge from the void like coffin ships breaching the surface of a sea of ink. The battle barge that leads them is old and scarred, its flanks thick with armor plating engraved in skulls and hourglasses and the names of dead campaigns. The sigil of the chapter, twin skulls joined into the shape of an hourglass, is carved into its prow as deeply as any orbital scar. Around it, escorts and smaller craft fan out, assuming kill vectors with the practiced calm of predators that have found a fresh carcass. They answer the ancient plea for aid with the only language they truly speak. Bombardment cannons wake along the hulls in rumbling sequence. Their barrels cycle out from protective housings, rites of activation hissing through their machine minds, cooling veins flooding with recirculated gases. Targeting cogitators, drink in auger returns, and spit out firing solutions with mechanical dispassion. The first shells fired at the Krav nest webs are sanctified, Each one bears purity seals painted on by chanting serfs, each inscribed with litanies against the warp, against corruption, against all things that would meddle with the hierarchy of life and death. It does not make the explosions that follow any cleaner. At these ranges, even the strange geometries of Crave constructs cannot save them. The nest webs shudder as shells the size of hab blocks punch into their struts and nodes. Matter that is only half real in this slice of space tears and splinters, shedding filamentous clouds of unreadable energies. Where the webs hold, the bombardment cannons simply fire again. Where their structure flexes reality around them, Star Phantom shipmasters adjust their firing arcs with grim patience, walking volleys along stress lines until the whole hideous architecture collapses. Crave vessels slither forward to intercept, pale hulls swimming through the debris field. There, weapons unfurl in delicate arrays, launching storms of shimmering projectiles that flicker in and out of phase as they streak towards the ash-white ships. The Star Phantoms answer with walls of cold iron and promethium. Flak batteries roar, lances burn, torpedo tubes cough out payloads wrapped in shields and sigils. Some of the enemy weapons slip through, impacting on shields that scream at frequencies too high for human ears. Crewmen flinch as something cold brushes their thoughts, as a whisper runs through the Vox network that is not in any language they know. The codifiers on the command decks clamp down on such bleed-throughs with brutal efficiency, cutting channels, isolating decks, purging machine spirits that show even a flicker of alien interference. It is a long, methodical extermination. One by one, the nest webs die, not in a chain reaction of blazing fury, but in a drawn-out dismemberment. Strands of guttering light snap and swing away into nothing. Whole sections collapse in on themselves, spewing fragments of unreality that evaporate like mist in the harsh light of the system's sun. The Crave ships withdraw, those that can, sinking back into the deeper dark, like parasites sloughed from a wound. Only when the last coherent auger traces of their constructs have faded does the chapter shift its attention fully to the ground. Cormag Secundus is still screaming. From high orbit, even through battered Auspex arrays, the Star Phantoms can see the gleam of fortress guns and the ugly seethe of Crave swarms pressed up hard against the outer bastions. The battle on the surface has not paused for their arrival. It has simply tilted, one more pressure added to a scale that has never truly balanced. The order goes out along the fleet's Vox network. Drop pods are readied. Deathstorm patterns are blessed and armed. Their automated weapon mounts fed belts of shells and racks of missiles inscribed with fresh kill prayers. Tactical squads check seals, and magazine counts. Devastator veterans chant through their targeting litanies, palms resting for a moment on the hungry mouths of Lascannon and Heavy Bolter. The storm begins. The drop pods fall in their hundreds, spinning seeds of steel and wrath trailing fire. They drop not behind the fortress lines or neatly into cleared landing zones, but into the no-man's land that has grown up between the bastions and the Crave attacks, into the craters and churned mud and tangle of razor wire and wreckage, where for generations only shells and screaming men have moved. The defenders of Cormag Secundus look up from their gun pits and trench lips and see the sky fill with falling coffins. Some think it is a new species of enemy weapon. Some think it is the final judgment they have been promised in so many lingering sermons. A few recognize the icons sliding along the flanks of the pods, the stark ash, white and black, the hourglass skulls that mark angels of death. The impacts hit like the hammer blows of a god that has finally noticed a prayer. Pods punch into the mud and shattered ferrocrete, kamikaze craters blooming around them. Shockwaves roll through entrenchments already on the brink of collapse. The outer plates of the pods count down impact sequences in machine time and then blow outward, their petals slamming into whatever surrounds them with enough force to crush bone and snap steel. Chains of Deathstorm drop. Pods leave their own imprint, slamming down and splitting open to reveal racks of heavy bolters and missile launchers that swivel and find targets within human speed. Their machine spirits, primed with the coordinates of order and enemy, begin to reap. Star phantoms burst out of the standard pods in the same breath, boots sinking into dirt thick with spent casings and viscera. They emerge into short, vicious hells, caught between bastion guns that are still firing at the swarms and the Crave themselves, their pale, lithe shapes weaving through the firestorm, weapons unfurling like obscene flowers. The Astartes do not hesitate. They have no interest in the neatness of lines or the preservation of landmarks. Devastator squads set up firing lines in the nearest cover, heavy weapons roaring at full capacity, walkers of shimmering energy blown apart under the sustained fury of concentrated bolts and lasfire. Tactical squads push forward at a measured pace, bolters on full auto, muzzles jerking as each round slams out, shells ripping alien matter into fragment clouds that twitch and writhe and then fall still. Bastion guns recalibrate as recognition runes flicker across their cogitator displays. Targeting prisms adjust, recoil dampers shift. Human gunners stare in dumb surprise as firing solutions update, as green painted markers shift away from the ash-white icons of the newly arrived war machines and lock instead on the dwindling patches of Kravi formations. For the first time in living memory, the defenders of Cormag, Secundus, feel the enemy truly pressed between hammer and anvil. It is a slaughter. The Crave have fed on the garrison for generations, slipping tendrils of influence into command structures, bending minds around their nest webs. They have never faced the unrelenting, impersonal hatred of the Star Phantoms. Where their psychic pressure turns mortal brains to slurry, it simply slides off the hardened synapse patterns of Adeptus Astartes' enhanced minds, finding no purchase. Where their strange geometries twist human nerves into knots, they meet ceramite and plasteel and are burned away. Within hours, the no man's land is choked with the remnants of their forms, with flickering, half-attached limbs melting into puddles of unlight, with husks that crack like old glass under the boots of the advancing giants. The fortress gates open. When the last of the Crave swarms have been driven back from the bastion walls, when the final nest pods within artillery range have been blown apart, and the drop zone swept clean, the fortresses of Cormag Secundus send out signals along battered vox spines and cracking picked cables. Outer gates grind wide, their teeth full of rust and ancient bone fragments. The survivors stumble out. They come in companies and solitary knots, in formal formations that fall apart halfway down the approach ramp, and in loose crowds that surge forward and sag back again. Their uniforms are ragged, patches upon patches, colors faded by smoke and time. Their armor is a mismatched collection of flak plates and scraps of carapace, adorned with battlefield trinkets and the odd, carefully preserved icon that has not yet flaked into nothing. Their faces look like Cormag Secundus itself, scarred, eroded, patched over. Some mouths move soundlessly as they step into the thin grey light. Some manage hoarse cheers that sound more like coughs. A few fall to their knees in the mud and weep, tears cutting pale tracks through grime thick enough to be called another layer of skin. They call the ash-white giants saviors. The word has not crossed many lips on Cormag Secundus in a long time. It feels strange in the mouths of men who have been bred for siege duty, men whose ancestors were taught that the only reprieve from duty lay under the soil. Yet for a moment it seems to fit. The enemy is gone from the walls. The sky is clear of nest webs. The bombardment has ceased. Hope, that fragile, unwelcome guest in the age of the crusade, dares to lift its head. The mortuary chaplains see something else. They move among the crowds of survivors like robed crows. Crozius grips tight in their gauntleted fists, helm lenses flickering with data and auguries invisible to mortal eyes. They listen to the way the garrison speaks, to the cadence of their words. They watch the way eyes track movement, the way fingers twitch on rifle stocks, the way shoulders hunch when the wind changes direction. They see the slow, insidious rot that 2 centuries of crave bombardment has left in the flesh of the fortress world. A young officer, his face unlined despite the chronology stamped on his service record, laughs a beat too late at a comrade's joke, his eyes not quite matching the mirth in his voice. A trench priest, robed stiff with dried mud and old blood, clutches a rosarius carved into a shape no sanctioned artisan would have blessed, its angles subtly wrong, its skulls too smooth. A squad of gunners grips their weapons in a uniform way no drill sergeant would have enforced, fingers perfectly aligned, knuckles pale, faces blank. Gene scans come back imperfect. Warp residue clings to the garrison like damp, seeping into their bones, resting in the shadows beneath their eyes. No obvious mutations blossom on their skin. No tentacles or horns betray the easy presence of demonic taint. The corruption is deeper, more intimate. It sits in the neural pathways, in the synapse patterns rewritten by centuries of exposure to crave psychic predation. Left alone, it will blossom, perhaps in a decade, perhaps in a generation, perhaps sooner. The chaplains confer on a ridge of broken concrete overlooking the mustering grounds. Their discussion is short. The judgment they bring back to the chapter master is even shorter. Cormag Secundus is compromised beyond redemption. The pivot is instant. Star Phantom squads that have been holding the breach lines turn in unison. Heavy weapons that have just finished spitting their last rounds at crave constructs swing on new bearings. Tank turrets grind on their mountings, dozer blades biting deeper into the blood-soaked earth as drivers shift position. The fortress world breathes a shuddering sigh of relief as the initial rush of victory settles. Then the killing begins again. The first volley comes from the bastion guns. Command signals from void shield control reroute targeting relays. Fresh firing solutions blossom across cogitator displays. Barrel crews blink in. Confusion as their own bastions approach, ramps and parade grounds pop into existence within the crosshairs. Some protest, some hesitate. Those who do are relieved of duty by the simple expedient of a bolt round to the back of the skull. The mortars cough, the macro cannons bellow, the plasma batteries howl. The open killing grounds outside the fortresses become true killing grounds. Star Phantoms advance into the storm of their own choosing, their armor stitching with impacts, their blessed plates shrugging off shrapnel that scythes human bodies into ragged pieces. They fire into the crowds with the same unhurried efficiency they turned on the Cravey, bolt shells tearing into torsos and skulls, flamer streams washing over clusters of fleeing figures and painting them in liquid fire. There are screams now, where there had only been a dazed muttering before. The word saviors comes back, but twisted, thick with blood and disbelief. Men who have stood unflinching under alien, fire for their entire lives, break and run under the sudden, incomprehensible betrayal of their supposed rescuers. It changes nothing. Initiates execute those who attempt to rally resistance, slugging the first few men to raise las rifles with rifle butts before putting rounds through their hearts. Veterans pick out officers and priests by instinct, dropping them at range with precise blasts. Some of the garrison simply stand and let themselves be cut down, lips moving in half-remembered prayers, faces slack with exhaustion. Others fall to their knees in the churned mud and beg, hands outstretched towards the ash-white figures striding through the carnage. A few continue to fight until the very end, teeth bared, eyes bright with the same madness that has driven them through decades of siege. Their courage is irrelevant. It is a quality measured only at the moment they fall, in the depth of the crater where their bodies come to rest, in the completeness of their annihilation. By the time the guns fall silent, Cormag Secundus has been saved twice and destroyed once. The Crave are gone, driven from the system, their nest webs reduced to debris fields that will haunt its orbital mechanics for centuries. The fortress garrison is gone as well, its long-suffering defenders reduced to meat and bone and ash. The star phantoms begin the work of tidying. The world is already full of craters. It is a simple thing to repurpose them. Command squads move through the killing grounds, auspexes humming, tagging depressions large enough to serve as pyre pits. Servitors and pressed laborers drag bodies, whole and partial, into the designated hollows, wrist-thick cables winching broken tanks and gun carriages in after them for good measure. Apothecaries and their attendants move among the star phantom's own dead, reclaiming gene seed, burning what remains of their brother's flesh with carefully measured charges. It would be improper for their dead to share the same pyres. As those whose souls are deemed suspect, the mortuary cult is strict on this point. When the pits are full, promethium flows. Fuel lines bristle from tankers and storage silos. Purity seals flutter and crackle as lighters trace the marks of the aquila in the air above each crater. Chanting begins in low, harsh voices, picked up and layered by chantry servitors whose throats have long since ceased to be entirely human. Their songs are not gentle hymns of rest. They are ledger recitations, lists of debts called due and paid in full. Flames rise. They climb higher than the bastion walls, black smoke boiling up into the already fouled sky, carrying with it the stink of cooked flesh and burnt oil, and the fragile carbon traces of all the forgotten things that made up human lives. The heat warps the air until the world beyond the pyres shimmers, as if seen through the lens of a kiln. The star phantoms stand and watch until the last body collapses into cinders. On orbit, administratum, scribes prepare their reports. The campaign on Cormag Secundus is logged as a success. The primary Xenos threat is listed as eliminated. The secondary threat, classified under the vague headings of contamination and compromised loyalty, is also flagged as neutralized. Casualty figures scroll past in columns that grow almost too large to fit on a single data slate. Human losses are compared against projected losses had the siege continued for another century. The conclusion is simple. The world has been saved resources. The Departamento Munitorum stares at the scar that remains and sees opportunity. A fortress world with existing defenses, cleared of its problematic native garrison, in a region already configured for the constant flow of supplies and munitions, is too valuable to waste. The charter is drafted and stamped and sealed. Cormag Secundus will be re-garrisoned, not with fresh-born regiments of proud lineages, but with condemned men and women shipped in from across the sector's penal colonies. Prisoners will man the rebuilt bastions. Penal legions will dig fresh trenches in the shadows of craters still blackened with old soot. Overseers will walk the parapets where once beleaguered officers stared up at crave webs and falling star phantom pods. New skulls will join the old in the world's soil, inquisitorial eyes, drawn by the scale of the purgation, narrow behind masks and hoods. The sealed files note that the Star Phantom's methods on Cormag Secundus were effective. They note that the chapter detected taint that ordinary regiments could not have identified, that they acted decisively to prevent a potential cravey foothold within a critical fortress world. They also note that the number of human dead brought about by those actions rivals, and in some projections exceeds, the number who would have died had the siege simply been allowed to grind on. Even in an age where extermination is a common word, there is something about a chapter that exterminates its own allies immediately upon liberation that makes even hardened witch hunters uneasy. There are whispers in the cloisters of the Ordo Hereticus and in the data vaults of the Ordo Xenos. Words like excessive and fanatical and structurally dangerous appear in dossiers that otherwise praise loyalty and doctrinal purity. Some speak of censure. Others, remembering Hakanth and Sakura and the long, unbroken list of threats the Star Phantoms have erased, argue that such blades are too useful to cast aside. On a troop carrier anchored in high orbit, a Lord General of the Astra Militarum sits alone at his desk and stares at the numbers on the slate before him. He has fought through more campaigns than he cares to remember, watched more men die than any sane mind should be able to hold. He knows the calculus of war in his bones. Lives in, lives out, worlds held, worlds lost. It should not surprise him that more humans died in the day of the Star Phantom's salvation than in the 2 centuries of siege that preceded it. It still does. The slate trembles slightly in his hands. He looks at the neat columns of figures, at the stacked rows of zeros that represent regiments annihilated and civilian populations erased, and then at the seal at the bottom of the report. The red wax is stamped with the sigil of the Munitorum. The words beside it are simple: threat neutralized, world secured, theater stabilized. He knows how this will be recorded. Cormag Secundus will appear in the histories as a fortress world that held against an alien onslaught for longer than most empires are allowed to exist, saved at last by the timely intervention of the Angels of Death. The massacre that followed will be reduced to a line item under collateral losses, a footnote in the great ledger of the Imperium's slow dying. The Lord General sets the slate down and pours himself a measure of recaf that tastes of rust and old bitterness. He drinks it black, staring out of the viewport at the ash-pale shapes of the Star Phantom ships as they turn away from the world they have purified. Somewhere below, in the still smouldering crater fields, the last pyres of Cormag Secundus gutter out, leaving only drifting ash to mark where hope once dared to stand. The stars of the crusade burn like fresh wounds on the hololith. In the command sanctum of the Memento Mori, the light of 100 conquered systems hangs in the air as a trembling map of ruin. Each point is a world taken in fire, its data rune surrounded by rings of tiny sigils denoting compliance, tithe grade, garrison strength, casualty projections. Lines of crimson link them, the plotted path of a single mortal, whose name is already being whispered in shrine halls across the Imperium. Lord Commander Solar Macarius. His banners sweep ahead of the crusade fleets like a storm front, regiments of the Astra Militarum, and whole chapters of the Adeptus Astartes drawn in his wake. Worlds that have not seen the Aquila in 10 standard millennia bow their heads or burn under the weight of his advance. The historians who survive will later call those years the greatest crusade since the Great Betrayal, a golden flare against the encroaching night of the age. From the vantage point of the Star Phantoms, it is another ledger. Omedon Tiresias, chapter master and blind guardian of a lost shrine world, sits in his throne while the hololithic projection shifts and shivers in the pallid light, washing over his scarred features. Around him, officers of the 2nd and 5th and 8th companies stand silent, helmets clipped to belts or held under arms, eyes fixed on the ghosted silhouette of Macarius's main thrust. The vox ghosts of the Lord Commander's voice have already reached them, carried on astropathic channels and relayed through countless intermediate stations. Requests framed as orders, orders dressed thinly as requests. Macarius, for all his brilliance, needs hammer blows, as well as scalpels. The Star Phantoms have been called to serve. They meet his call in the way they know. The first of the Crusade worlds to feel their full attention is a nameless rock of dust and broken hive stacks at the edge of the Crusade's southern spearhead. Heretic militia and mercenary regiments loyal only to their own paymasters have dug in among the ruins, raising void shield towers out of shattered cathedra, mounting stolen macro cannon on the stumps of toppled spires. They have already bloodied the leading waves of Imperial Guard, annihilating whole subsectors of Macarius's advance and slowing his timetable. The Lord Commander sends a signal. He requires the fortress neutralized in time for his next scheduled victory. Crusade Command expects the Star Phantoms to make planetfall in coordination, with the weary guard regiments already bleeding against the walls. Officers speak of combined assaults upon bastion gates, of armored wedges pushing up through the rubble under the cover of orbital bombardment, carefully patterned to spare the hungry lines of loyal men. The Star Phantoms refuse. They argue in clipped, cold phrases over encrypted vox bands, their strategium voices quiet but unyielding. They will not tangle their firing solutions around the fragile bodies of mortal regiments. They will not thread precise lance strikes through the gaps between Allied trenches and enemy parapets. They will not expose their own brothers to the clumsiness of guard command hierarchies already fraying from protracted engagement. They will erase the problem. Their fleet swings into position without waiting for the final ascent of Macarius's staff. Bombardment cannons cycle through prayers and target locks. Orbital augurs pin the heretic fortress in their sights, not as a city of habs and redoubts and refugee warrens, but as a pattern of void shield harmonics and mass concentrations. The first salvo reduces entire districts to glowing glass. The second and third dig deeper, punching through collapsed shells and into the revetments where the enemy has sunk their precious guns. Whole regiments die before they ever see a Star Phantom in the flesh, lost beneath shifting waves of rubble and plasma venting. Some of those men wear the same colors as the regiments that had bled for years in front of these walls. The killing radius of a macro shell does not distinguish. When at last the drop pods fall, they fall into wasteland. The Star Phantoms come down in a storm of ceramite and fire, their pods bracketed by still burning ruins. There are no bastion parapets to storm, no tidy lines of defenders to cut apart at close range. There is only dust and ash, and the random pockets of resistance that somehow survived the orbital holocaust. The Astartes fan out, bolters barking, finishing what the cannons began, stripping the last tatters of life from a city that was already more corpse than structure. Crusade, command notes the victory, with cautious approval and clenched jaws. Macarius himself, receiving the after-action reports and casualty tallies, is less forgiving. On another world months later, under another sky turned black by promethium smoke and the contrails of dropcraft, he watches ash-white figures stride among the ruins his regiments have spent blood to reach. His adjutants speak of delays in the advance of the Third Army Group because Star Phantom orbital fire once again treated guard and rebel positions with equal indifference. Names are read to him, lists of commanders whose corpses cannot even be recovered because there is nothing left on the grid squares where they died. He listens in silence. Then he gives his own judgment, a crisp notation added to the command codex of the Crusade. The Star Phantoms, it is recorded, are unsuitable for close support of Imperial forces. They are to be deployed at range, as instruments of bombardment and siege breaking, never as delicate partners in the dance of combined arms. The chapter accepts this verdict with the same calm it applies to everything. They are not insulted. They agree. The crusade burns on, worlds falling in the span of years that would normally see only a single sector pacified. The Star Phantoms move along its southern flank, called in whenever a fortress proves too stubborn, when an entrenched enemy refuses to yield to the more measured applications of guard artillery and more temperate chapters bolters. They turn battlefields into wastelands, and those wastelands into compliance zones, bathed in the glow of new administratum beacons. When Macarius dies, the light goes out almost overnight. The Lord Commander's heart fails him on a world that bears his name by the time the news reaches the far arms of his conquests. Some say grief kills him, that being barred by the High Lords from pushing onward into the untamed dark breaks the machine of his ambition. Others whisper quieter things about knives in the dark and poison in ceremonial cups.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
The truth is devoured by the bureaucracy as quickly as the man's deeds are carved into statues. The worlds he took do not mourn for long. Without the gravitational pull of his will, the whole edifice of the crusade begins to sag and crack. The governors he installed in newly compliant systems begin to question why their tithes should flow up past their own hands. The generals he placed in charge of vast armies begin to wonder why those armies should not now answer to them alone. In the long shadow of his passing, war ignites again. The administratum will call it the Macarian heresy. For the Star Phantoms, it is simply more work. They are already in the region when the first reports of uprisings and secessionist movements begin to filter in. Fortress worlds that had flown Macarius's banners tear them down and raise their own. Regiments that once marched to his cadence turn their guns on imperial convoys and tithe in forces. Communications once again fill with pleas for aid, demanding that the Imperium save these freshly won territories from themselves. Imperial command points the hourglass sigil at the map and does what it always does. On the world of Thoth, the 17th Trax Guard stand to arms as ash-white ships slide into their sky. They have fought under the banners of the crusade since its early days, a proud regiment from the forge world of Trax, renowned for their discipline and their unflinching endurance under bombardment. Their colors are sewn with campaign badges from half a dozen systems, their officers' breastplates engraved with the stylized likenesses of Macarius's Aquila. They remain in their own minds and in their own dispatches, loyal. Somewhere above them, in the command sanctum of the Memento Mori, the data is less forgiving. Reports have reached the chapter of Thoth's governor, failing to enact certain tithes. Intercepted Vox traffic suggests negotiations with other secessionists. Generals attempts to form a breakaway realm in the wake of Macarius's death. There are whispers of Trax Guard units acting as enforcers for this nascent rebellion. Their siege expertise turned to the fortification of worlds that have not yet had time to even learn the names of their so-called liberators. Omadon Tiresias weighs these fragments in the hollow where his eyes once were and finds them wanting. The Emperor as Imperator Mortifex does not care for the excuses of the nearly loyal. He cares for the entries in his ledger. The order given is as short as it is terrible. Purge the governor. Purge the command staff. If the 17th Trax Guard has indeed stepped beyond the narrow path of obedience, purge them as well. The Star Phantoms descend on Thoth in silent fury. Orbital fire knocks the teeth out of the governor's palace in the first minutes. Precision strikes flensing away its void shield generators and anti-air emplacements. The bombardment ceases the moment. The bastion is toothless, allowing the drop pods to fall into courtyards still glowing from thermal stress. What happens inside those walls is quick and messy. Astartes in ash-white armor walk through gilded corridors adorned with fresh frescoes of Macarius's victories, and cut down anyone bearing a sign of authority. Governors, their families, their advisors, the clerks who have kept the ledgers of their petty treasons all die under bolt shells and chain-blade teeth. Their bodies are left where they fall, rich fabrics soaking up blood that will never wash out. The 17th Trax Guard reacts as drilled soldiers should. They move to contain the disturbance. They form firing lines. They bring up armor to shield command centers, convoy routes, supply depots. They send liaison officers to open channels with the mysterious Astartes, whose drop pods have fallen on their world without warning, expecting explanations, coordination, perhaps demands for shared assault plans. What they receive instead are firing solutions. To the eyes of the Star Phantoms, there is no practical distinction between a regiment that has already turned its coat and one that is likely to do so when the balance of power shifts. They have seen too much of the galaxy's rot to allow nuance a place on their scales. The 17th Trax Guard are tools of a secessionist governor in a region already aflame with betrayal. They are as guilty as their master. The bombardment that follows is brief. The first shells fall among the regimental mustering yards, tearing open barracks and parade grounds. throwing men and machines into the air in ragged pieces. Batteries of anti-air cannon that had been carefully positioned to cover approaches from the expected enemy are caught on the wrong vectors, their crews scrambling to traverse their guns towards the sudden thunderous threat and dying before they can complete the arc. Armored columns attempting to break out of the kill zones find themselves bracketed by Lascannon and missile fire from Star Phantom squads, already dug in along the most obvious escape routes. Commissars bellow orders, blow the heads off deserters, rally countercharges, but there is no rhetoric that can bridge the gulf between mortal flesh and Astartes ceramite. In a single day, a regiment that has served the Imperium for generations is extinguished. The reports that leave Thoth afterwards are thin. The data slate entries are tucked into the restricted sections of Administratum archives, their headings marked with the sigils of multiple inquisitorial orders. The words within are bold. The 17th Trax Guard is listed as destroyed in action against secessionist forces. No mention is made of who pulled the trigger. If the Star Phantoms feel any disquiet, it does not show on their kill tallies. They bleed again in the wars that follow, not only against mortal regiments gone rogue, but against another chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. The Marines Malevolent are creatures of harsh doctrine and calculated cruelty, themselves no strangers to collateral damage and brutal interpretations of loyalty. They have fought beside the Star Phantoms on at least one world in the early days of the Crusade, their yellow armor stained with the same filth of war as the ash-white of their compatriots. There is a certain grim kinship there, born of shared contempt for the fragility of guardsmen and the rhetoric of softer chapters. Kinship does not survive the Macarian heresy. When the banners fracture and worlds begin to slough off imperial writ, the Marines Malevolent choose their sides with the same brutality they bring to the battlefield. Their stratagems deviate, their commanders take liberties. In the patchwork war of reclamation that follows, they stand between the Star Phantoms and targets the ledger demands must die. There are no formal declarations of war. One engagement on a dust-choked moon in the outer reaches becomes a little too heated. Mutual accusations of tactical negligence grind into outright fury when orbital fire from a Marine's Malevolent strike cruiser burns out a Star Phantom forward firebase in an attempt to break a rebel counterattack. In the next engagement, Star Phantom bombards fall suspiciously close to yellow armored lines, scything through squads that had believed themselves safe. The spiral is swift. In the cold dark above a nameless, half-conquered world, ash, white and yellow ships exchange fire not with heretics, but with each other. Marines who once fought shoulder to shoulder meet across blasted ridgelines with chainswords screaming, their oaths to the Emperor matched wherever their loyalty to one another has failed. Both chapters lose brothers in numbers that would shame entire campaigns elsewhere. The Marines Malevolent come close to extinction, their fleets shattered, their remaining companies forced to withdraw or die where they stand. It is Badab in miniature long, before the Palace of Thorns is ever raised. The Inquisition cannot ignore this. The Ordo Hereticus sends its servants to pick through the wreckage of the Macarian sectors, when at last the heresy is beaten back into line. They walk among the burnt-out shells of Manufactoria and the half-rebuilt shrine cities, speaking with survivors, interrogating officers, interrogating cogitators. They request, and where necessary seize, the battle logs of the Star Phantoms. They find much that disturbs, and nothing that breaks the letter of loyalty. The chapter's record is painted in fire and mass graves, but every act, however extreme, can be traced back to a doctrinal root within imperial theology. They have purged the tainted, yes. They have slain allies in quantities that strain the definition of collateral, yes. They have nearly destroyed a fellow chapter in a war of pride and differing interpretations of necessity, yes. They have also eradicated secessionist movements that might have grown into new rebel empires. They have broken fortress worlds that no sane mortal assault would have taken without a century of attrition. They have extinguished the embers of Macarius's fractured realm with a thoroughness no other chapter was willing to match. There are no whispers of demonic pacts in their halls. No forbidden grimoires lie open on their lecterns. The gene seed cultures report clean, if grim. Their chaplains preach only the Emperor, though in his harshest and most unforgiving aspect. The verdict that emerges from the sealed conclaves is a paradox. The Star Phantoms are loyal. The Star Phantoms are dangerous. Censure follows in the only form that can stick to such a weapon. They are bound formally to a long, grinding campaign of interdiction against the remnants of the Macarian heresy, their movements restricted on parchment, if not always in practice. Task forces of ash-white dropcraft and gun-heavy escorts are dispatched again and again to the fringes of the conquered realms to hunt down warlords and mutinous regiments who try to slip away into the underbelly of the segmentum. It is thankless work, without the glory of major theatre battles or the clean lines of fresh crusades. The cost is staggering. Every renegade cruiser they burn in the void costs them escorts crippled or lost. Every fortress they hammer flat with orbital fire and siege assault costs them brothers broken under falling debris or sniped from half-collapsed towers. They are cutting out cancers from a body that has already been riddled with shot, and each surgery tears more of the flesh away. When at last the Administratum declares the Macarian heresy sufficiently contained for the purposes of proper record-keeping, the Star Phantoms are smaller again. They do not return to any fortress world for rest. Instead, by their own decree, they turn their surviving ships towards the southern reaches of Segmentum Tempestus, towards the half-charted gulfs and ragged borders where orc empires gnaw on human colonies, and the first tendrils of the great devourer have begun to test the strength of the galaxy. It is not a crusade sanctioned by the High Lords. It is not one structured by the Ministorum's grand rhetoricians. It is a quiet thing, recorded in the logs of navigators as simply as any other voyage. A Star Phantom strike cruiser vanishes into the warp along a vector pointing towards an orc-infested cluster. Years later, an Administratum surveyor notes that the same cluster appears silent, its primary world's Vox beacons burned out, its surface scarred by unmistakable patterns of orbital bombardment. Another time, a data burst from an outpost on the edge of an unstable warp corridor describes ash-white drop pods falling through a sky already black with the wings of demonic flyers. By the time a relief fleet can reach the coordinates, the outpost is cold and empty, its walls lined with fresh skulls, its vox shrines humming with a single, continuous litany praising the judge of the dead. Imperial record keepers, overworked and underpaid, file such incidents under the broad heading of Astartes intervention. The name of the chapter involved is lost in the shorthand. The pattern, however, holds. Every time the Imperium points the Star Phantoms at a problem, something dies. Sometimes it is the enemy, neatly obliterated, their banners torn down, their strongholds flattened, their leaders reduced to a line of ink in a mortuary ledger. Sometimes it is the Allies who are unfortunate enough to stand too close to the blast radius of the solution. More often than not, it is both. On maps, worlds shift from red to compliant white. On ledgers, threats are marked neutralized. On battle honors, the sigil of the double-skull hourglass acquires more and more tiny notches denoting deployments that no bard will bother to sing. In the hearts of those few commanders and inquisitors who have watched them work and lived, unease grows. The Star Phantoms do what they are asked, but they never only do what they are asked. They do what they deem necessary. In a galaxy where necessity is increasingly defined as whatever keeps the Imperium staggering forward for one more bloody step, the line between enemy and acceptable loss becomes less a boundary and more a graveled slope. The chapter walks it with steady, unhurried strides. their eyes fixed not on the living who fall away on either side, but on the long, dark horizon where all things come to rest at last under the gaze of their chosen judge. The Badab War is a cauterized wound in the flesh of the Imperium. In the restless reaches of the Maelstrom Zone, a single chapter of the Adeptus Astartes had turned from the narrow, choking path of obedience. The astral claws, swollen on authority and tithe exemptions, declared themselves masters of a breakaway realm. Around them gathered other wayward sons, Maelstrom warders and allies who valued autonomy over submission. Loyalist chapters answered the summons of the High Lords, and for long, bloody years, Space Marine killed Space Marine amid the shattered systems around Badab. It is a civil war written only in the colors of ash, flame, and vacuum. When the call comes to the Star Phantoms, it bears the seal of the Inquisition itself. Inquisitor Legate Frayne speaks with the authority of terror and the cold dispassion of a butcher's tallyman. The war has dragged on too long. The secessionists are dug in too deep. The Imperium requires a blade willing to cut away rot in chunks rather than scrape at it delicately with the tip of a scalpel. In the closing years of the 9th century of the 41st millennium, ash-white hulls slide from the warp on plumes of tortured light. The Memento Mori leads the way, her ancient prow scarred by battles that no longer feature on most star charts. Her flanks are thick with battle honors, her hourglass sigils stained by bone dust from a dozen theaters. Beside her hangs the strike cruiser, Pale Wrath, smaller but no less deadly, its mass drivers and bombardment arrays freshly sanctified for siege work. Around these two core vessels cluster several more strike cruisers, their names carrying the weight of lost shrine worlds and forgotten campaigns, and a shoal of escorts, a score and more of lean, gun-heavy ships that move like carrion fish around leviathans. It is not a vast armada. It does not need to be. The Maelstrom's sick light washes over this compact pack of killers as they burn towards the Badab system. The astral charts floating above the Memento Mori's Strategium deck show the system ringed in iron. Star forts and weapon platforms and minefields, a band of hardened defenses known to the war's participants as the Ring of Steel. It is a barrier forged by the tyrant of Badab to keep out the Imperium. The Star Phantoms do not see a barrier. They see a list of targets. Gun crews sprint to their stations along the gun. Decks of the Memento Mori. Bombardment cannon housings hiss as ancient seals are broken and heavy barrels cycle out into the void. Machine spirits wake, hungry and eager, their sub-vocalized Binharic growls echoing in the minds of their attendant tech marines. Targeting cogitators fix cold electronic gazes upon the hulking silhouettes of the star forts strung around Badab Primaris, picking out weak points, shield harmonics, ammunition stores. On the chapter master's order, the first salvo is loosed. Shells the size of hab blocks howl through vacuum-trailing litanies painted in inert pigment and strips of parchment. The Ring of Steel answers with its own fire, macro cannons vomiting their hatred, lance batteries burning thin, bright scars through the dark. Ships die in that first exchange, some loyalist, many secessionist, the debris of their passing folded into the expanding clouds of junk already drifting through the contested space. The Star Phantoms treat it as the opening, strokes of a long, patient execution. They do not duel, they grind. The Memento Mori and the Pale Wrath bracket a star fort between them and walk bombardment patterns across its hull, ignoring the howl of return fire that slams into their void shields and rattles their armored bones. Each salvo chews away more of the fortress's skin. Docking bays collapse, spilling fighters and boarding craft into explosive decompression. External gun towers tear free and spin off, their crews reduced to frozen dust in the wake of secondary detonations. Every time a section falls dark, cogitators adjust the firing patterns and begin to erase the next. Escorts dart in and out of the expanding fields of wreckage, hunting down crippled defense craft and lesser platforms. Strike cruisers push closer, their own batteries adding to the storm. A ring of steel, built to endure the measured hammer blows of more cautious chapters, begins to buckle under the relentless, unblinking aggression of the Star. Phantoms. One by one, the Star forts fall. Some die in sudden blossoms of light as their reactors go critical under sustained assault. Others gut themselves slowly, venting atmosphere and debris as the scaffolding of their defiant existence comes apart. A few, their weapon emplacements gutted and their command spires blasted into powder, fall silent and drift, mausoleums of dead Astartes and mortal crewmen that will haunt the system's orbit for centuries to come. When the last of the major forts has been reduced to scrap and graveyard, the noose around Badab Primaris loosens. The war does not end, it simply sinks lower. High in the system's gravity, well hangs the orbital fortress known as the High Guard, a key bastion in the tyrant's control of the void. Its guns have already claimed their share of loyalist ships during the Long War, its bastions lined with secessionist Astartes, whose gene-coded authorizations still give them sway over the fortress's systems. The Star. Phantoms are ordered to break it. They do not go alone. Alongside them march the Firehawks, their armor the color of burning metal, and the Sons of Medusa, green-bedecked Templars of the Machine God. Drop pods and boarding torpedoes fall from their combined fleets in a new storm, slamming into the High Guard's armored hide, biting deep into docking bays and transit shafts. The corridors of the fortress become charnel trenches. Space Marines kill Space Marines in the thin, sour air, bolter fire ripping chunks out of walls already scored by ricochet marks and backblasts. Bodies in the colors of both sides lie tangled together, their postures frozen mid-strike, apothecaries of the Sons of Medusa dragging corpses out of sight to harvest genocide even as bolt shells scream past them. Firehawks burn entire sections clear, promethium roaring from their flamers, turning barricades and the men behind them into pillars of charring meat. Star Phantoms bring their own doctrine, even here, in the cramped, messy confines of hostile bulkheads. Devastator squads establish kill zones at junctions and in long, straight thoroughfares, their heavy weapons turning storm-shielded veterans into smears of ceramite and blood. Tactical squads advance behind the barricades of corpses they create, methodically culling any who move or twitch. Step by step, deck by brutal deck, the Loyalists take the High Guard. With its fall, the last true bastion of secessionist orbital power breaks. The way to the world itself lies open. Badab Primaris is a wounded jewel, its hives and ocean platforms scarred by years of siege, its skies stained by the smoke of burning refineries and the drifting ash of downed voidcraft. At its heart sits the Palace of Thorns, the fortress palace of Luft Huron, the self-styled tyrant of Badab, a monstrous structure wound around a promontory hive like a crown of barbs. The palace is not merely stone and armor. It is girded by a lightning shield, howling, crackling curtain of energy fed by reactors sunk deep into the bones of the planet, its arcs powerful enough to peel armor from attacking tanks and lance the wings off Thunderhawks. The Imperium gathers everything it can spare for the assault. Titans of Legio Crucius stride across Badab's continents, each step cracking streets and plazas, each blast from their quake cannons and plasma annihilators, turning blocks of the palace's outer fortifications into tumbling rubble. Siege lines in ash white, green, crimson, yellow, and more advance and fall back, the colors of countless chapters joining in one miserable assault wave. The first breach attempts are murder. Landing zones carefully plotted by strategists and cogitators are instantly transformed into kill zones by the palace's guns. Artillery dug into its bastions hurls shells down into the gathered assault craft, shredding drop platforms and tanks into twisted scrap. Raptors and secessionist Terminators launch. Counterattacks along the shattered approaches, their bolters and blades claiming loyalist lives in droves. The Star Phantoms die with the same deliberate calm with which they have always killed. In the opening rush, nearly 200 of them fall. Thunderhawks disintegrate under flak blasts, spilling burning ceramite and ruined gene-wrought flesh across the pulverized ground. Drop pods managing to land in the first waves often open onto immediate crossfire. Veterans in ash-white armor staggering forward under the hammer blows of prepared kill teams before plasma fire or massed chain blades take them apart. Whole squads are wiped out, securing a single stairway, a single bunker, a single crater lip. The death toll would stagger another chapter. The Star Phantoms mark it down and keep moving. Loss is not a thing to be avoided. It is a metric. It is weighed against the objective and found acceptable or not. The mortuary chaplains stride the lines, Crozier's heads cracked and blackened from deflecting blows, counting the fallen with their eyes even as they roar fresh battle litanies. The palace's lightning shield crackles and screams overhead, deflecting orbital fire and turning what should be a measured siege into a grinding melee fought under a curtain of untouchable power. Loyalist titans hurl their wrath against the invisible barrier, their weapons bathing its surface in shimmering heat haze. For all their fury it holds, the solution comes, as so often in this war, from teeth in the dark. Carcharodon's Astra, grey-clad reavers drawn in from the distant reaches beyond the maelstrom, slip into the hive stacks beneath the palace like knife-blade shadows. They make no speeches. They send no grand communiques. They descend into the underhive and set about sabotaging the reactors that feed the lightning shield's ravenous appetite. When the outage comes, it is not announced. In the command sanctum of the Memento Mori and the other assembled flagships, warning runes spike and then collapse. Auspex returns, long smeared by energy distortion, sharpen in an instant. For the first time in too long, the palace's void-shimmering silhouette is clear and naked on the displays. On the ground, assault companies feel the hairs on their arms lie flat as the static in the air bleeds away. The roar of the lightning arcs cuts out, leaving a sudden hollow silence, like the pause between heartbeats. For the Star Phantoms, it is the moment when the upper skull of the hourglass has emptied itself into the throat. They do not waste it. Artillery that has been holding fire rather than waste shells against the barrier unleashes its anger in one communal exhalation. Titan cannons blaze, their shots punching through previously deflected firing arcs to bite into the palace's upper works. Strike craft vector in, Lascannons and multi-melter slung under their wings, screaming down into the gaps that open in the lattice of bastions and spires. On the surface, fresh waves of ash-white armor surge forward into the breaches. At their head walks Captain Drukal Androcles of the 9th Company. He has earned the title of Siegebreaker over long decades of grinding his way through walls, every sane man declared impassable. His armor is heavy with scars and reliquaries, the hourglass on his pauldron darkened by bone dust from more sieges than most chapters see in an age. His personal banner, carried by a veteran at his side, bears the names of fortresses cracked and tyrants slain. Inside the Palace of Thorns, he will add another. He leads his company through a breach ripped open by a Titan's close-range blast, molten stone and ceramite still running like wax down the edges of the wound. The air is thick with dust and ionized smoke, visibility cut down to arm's length. Auspex returns are a jungle of interference and overlapping signatures from friend and foe alike. It does not matter. The path is forward. The catacombs beneath. The palace are a maze of murder. Corridors kink and dogleg at regular intervals, channeling attackers into prepared kill zones. Murder holes and concealed firing slits line walls, their black mouths vomiting bolt shells and flamer gouts into the faces of advancing loyalists. Minds wired to trip lines and pressure plates take limbs and lives. The secessionist Astartes know their own fortress well, and they defend it as if the loss of every meter is a personal insult. Androcles meets all of this with a straight, grim determination that borders on serenity. He orders Devastator squads to burn out firing nests with plasma and melter rather than waste lives on frontal charges. Where a corridor is too well covered, he has his tech marines plant charges in the walls and simply creates a new one. Where the floor is seeded with obvious traps, he sends combat servitors stomping ahead, their clumsy, enslaved bodies detonating mines and revealing ambushes in gouts of explosive violence. The Ninth Company bleeds. Brothers fall to sniper shots from concealed high galleries, their helms erupting in fountains of bone and coolant. Others are dragged down in sudden, feral counterattacks by Astral Claw's Terminators, the clash of chain fists and thunder hammers echoing off the stone until one side or the other lies broken. Medicus servitors drag bodies back towards the rear as far as they can before the front surges forward again and cuts them off. Still, the advance continues. Reports filtered back through the Voxnet speak of other breaches, other companies pushing through other sections of the palace, but Androcles is not concerned with the wider picture. His focus is narrowed to the meters ahead, to the doors that need to be blown, the kill zones that need to be crossed, the staircases that need to be taken. Each turn of the catacombs brings him closer to the palace's heart. The final confrontation begins without heraldry. There is no grand hall, no throne room. Epiphany. There is a wide chamber deep in the palace's foundations, its walls bristling with data conduits and power feeds, its center filled with hololithic projectors showing the tactical state of the siege in cold glows. The floor is littered with spent casings and the bodies of secessionist serfs who had the misfortune to be caught here when the loyalists broke through. And at the far end, surrounded by his honor guard, stands Lugft Huron. The tyrant of Badab is a hulking figure, even in the terms of Astartes. His armor is a brutal hybrid of artificer-wrought plate and scavenged mechanisms, adorned with flayed flesh banners and the sigils of his astral claws. One arm ends in a massive lightning claw, its talons crackling with captured storm, arcs crawling along the edges of the blades. His helm is horned and snarling, the face behind it said to be as scarred and monstrous as the armor itself. His honor guard are killers all, veterans who have survived the entire length of the war, their armor marked with tally marks and personal blazons, their weapons held with the casual familiarity of men who have never known defeat until now. Androcles does not slow. The first exchange is a blur of bolt fire. Ninth Company veterans fan out, firing from the hip, bolt rounds detonating against the storm shields of Huron's guard, shredding the lesser troops around them. The tyrant's own gun roars in answer, heavy concussive shells hammering into Star Phantom ranks, blowing one brother in half, taking the head from another. Grenades detonate in mid-air as they are cut apart by accurate fire, fragments raining down like sharp, deadly rain. Then the distances close, and chainswords and power weapons find their voices. Androcles wades into the storm with the inevitability of a falling bastion. He carries a combi melter in one hand, its stock worn smooth where his gauntlets have gripped it through siege after siege, and a power sword in the other, its blade a simple, unadorned line of force. He kills an Astral Claw sergeant with a clipped, efficient blow, the sword passing under the man's guard and out through his spine, then steps over the collapsing body into the space that opens in the enemy line. A lightning claw rakes across his breastplate, sparks and shredded ceramite spraying. Warning runes flash in his helm, but his grip on his weapons does not falter. For a heartbeat, he is face to face with Lugft Huron. They are close enough that the tyrant's hot, ragged breath fogs the outer layer of Androcles' visor. Close enough that he can see the madness and the iron certainty burning equally bright in the other Astartes' eyes. Huron lunges, the lightning claw aimed for Androcles' throat. The captain twists, armor servos whining, the power field of the talons screeching as they glance off his pauldron instead of punching through his gorget. The blow spins him half around, his sword arm numb, his bones singing with the impact. He rides the momentum rather than fight it, letting it carry him into a roll that brings him up at the tyrant's unguarded flank. He fires the combi melter at point-blank range. The shot is an act of pure negation, a line of white-hot fury that erases whatever it touches. It hits Huron center mass. For an instant, the tyrant is outlined in burning light, his armor's aquila and claw sigils picked out in stark detail. Then the melter charge eats into ceramite and adamantium and flesh, turning breastplate and ribs and primary heart into a slurry of vapor and slag. The blast blows him off his feet and hurls him back into the tactical display plinth behind, shattering it into shards. The explosion takes Androcles too. Even in that fraction of a second, his armor's systems cannot compensate. The heat washes over him, boiling lubricants, cooking secondary systems. His left arm, already numbed by the glancing lightning claw, blackens and splits inside its ceramite casing. Flesh chars, bone cracks. Warning symbols explode across his vision in screaming red script. He falls, vision tilting, throwing him a last image of the chamber. Huron lies amid wreckage, armor open and spilling smoke, his honor guard shredded by the same blast that felled their master. Around them, the 9th Company is a ruin, their brothers lying in pieces or burning, their armor rent and oozing. A few move still, dragging themselves forward on stumps or broken limbs, weapons raised for one more shot, one more blow. No one walks out. By the time other loyalist forces carve their way down to the palace's heart, the chamber is a tomb. The tyrant of Badab is gone. Whether dragged away by surviving followers in the chaos immediately following the melter strike, whether he dragged himself into the dark on spite and will alone, or whether some fickle warp trickery intervened, the Star Phantoms do not know. What they understand is simpler. The Palace of Thorns is broken. Its master is ruined. The will that animated the secession dries up like blood in the sun. The Badab War ends not with a glorious surrender or a paraded execution, but with a half-melted set of armor and a chamber full of corpses. For the Star Phantoms, the cost is ruinous. When the casualty counts are finally tallied, a slow, grinding process that requires reconciling data from shattered companies and half-destroyed fleets, the chapter has been cut down yet again. Fewer than 400 battle brothers answer the role. Whole companies have been annihilated in the assaults on the Ring of Steel and the palace, their banners taken and sealed in mortuary vaults aboard the surviving ships. The Imperium offers reward as readily as it exacted obedience. The Badab sector, shorn of its tyrant and its secessionist overlords, requires a new guardian. The High Lords decree that the Star Phantoms will take that role. It is a poisoned chalice, a realm of wrecked worlds and resentful populations. But it comes with something the chapter has not possessed since Hakanth was torn from reality. A place to call home. They choose Jaga, an ice moon in the Archean system, its surface raked by constant storms, its crust thick with ancient glacial flows. It is a harsh, dead thing, orbited by wreckage and the occasional rusted shell of a secessionist weapon platform. To the Star Phantoms, it is perfect. They bring the memento mori down to its surface, like a spear driven into a corpse. The ancient battle barge, battered by decades of war and fresh damage from the Badab campaign, gouges a canyon through Jaga's ice before coming to rest, half buried, her massive hull jutting from the frozen landscape like a tombstone. The impact cracks the moon's crust, sending tremors through its core. Storms howl around the stranded ship, snow and ice blasting against its scarred flanks. The chapter sets about turning catastrophe into fortress. They seal the rent hole and reinforce the impact. Trench, buttressing the exposed sections in ferrocrete and stone, quarried from beneath the ice. They hollow out more of the moon around the embedded ship, tunneling into the bedrock, creating new galleries and ossuaries to mirror, in diminished form, the lost halls of Hakanth. The Memento Mori's internal decks become cloisters and chapels and training halls, its launch bays re-sanctified as reliquary vaults for the countless skulls and bones they carry with them. Jaga becomes a frozen monastery with a dead warship at its heart. From this entombed Leviathan, the Star Phantoms will watch over the Badab sector, their numbers thin, their armor scratched and dented, their memories heavy with the sieges and purges that brought them here. The Palace of Thorns lies broken across the oceans of Badab Primaris. The Ring of Steel is gone, replaced by empty orbits and drifting scrap. The Tyrant's realm is dust. The Imperium, in its slow, clumsy way, marks the war closed. For the Star. Phantoms. It is another entry in a ledger already too long. Another layer of bone dust to grind into their armor. Another set of names to add to the endless rolls whispered in the halls of echoes, deep within their entombed flagship. They have been executioners again, and the corpse they have left behind is a sector that still bleeds. Jaga is a dead stone wrapped in ice and howling air. From high orbit, it looks like a frozen tear, its surface a mass of storm fronts and glacier scars. Lightning crawls along the bellies of the clouds in pale violet veins. Cyclones drag walls of powdered ice around the poles, grinding mountains down a grain at a time. There are no seas, no forests, no cities. There is only rock and the thin, bitter crust of frozen atmosphere being torn apart and remade with every rotation. Half buried in that cruel waste lies a corpse that refuses to rot. The Memento Mori sits in a trench it carved for itself when it fell from the sky, an ancient battle barge, rammed nose first into the crust. Glaciers have flowed around its flanks, swallowing gun decks and launch bays, entombing armor belts under meters of compacted ice. Storms scour what remains exposed, polishing the adamantium skin to a dull, bone-pale sheen. From certain angles, the ship looks less like a vessel and more like the rib cage of a dead leviathan, frozen mid-breaching. The Star Phantoms call it home. They have sealed the rents that would have killed lesser machines long ago. Cracked hull plates have been welded and overplated. Void-hardened buttresses have been driven deep into the bedrock around the embedded hull, tying ship and moon together. Tunnels bored through ice and stone link the buried subdecks to new galleries carved out of Jaga's crust. Vox masts and defense turrets jut from the glaciers in crooked crowns of iron and stone. Within, the corridors feel more than ever like the inside of a tomb. Bulkheads are lined with skulls taken from 100 wars. Mortared into place with sanctified concrete, chapels have been hewn into former munition holds, their vaulted ceilings low and oppressive, their altars fashioned from torn-out sections of gun deck and reactor shielding. The ship's spine, once the thoroughfare of crewmen and servo skulls, now serves as the main nave of a fortress monastery built entirely from remembered death. It is perfect. The Star Phantoms have never sought the warmth of green worlds or the comfort of great spired cities. They do not need training grounds bathed in false sunlight or plazas in which to parade. They need walls to hang bones on. They need echoing halls for their chantries. They need a place where every step reminds them that they walk not among the living, but between layers of the dead. On Jaga, even the thunder of the storms above sounds like distant artillery, like the guns of a forgotten siege beating on the hull of a ship that has seen too many wars. Post-Badab, the chapter is thin. The role of battle brothers can be spoken aloud in a single sitting, though no one ever does. Whole companies were bled white in the assault on the Palace of Thorns and in the grinding attrition of the Ring of Steel. The banners that hang in the Hall of Echoes are heavy with black ribbons, each one bearing the name of a brother who will never again don his armor. Rebuilding is slow. It cannot be anything else. The Badab sector is a scarred, resentful realm, its population only beginning to crawl out from under the shadow of secession and reprisal. The Star Phantoms recruit from its broken worlds as they must, choosing youths whose eyes have already seen too much fire, whose hands are already familiar with the weight of a last rifle or a mining drill. They are brought up from rusted hive shells and wind-scoured island forts to Jaga, to walk the corpse ship's halls and breathe its recycled air, to learn that the emperor these giants serve has more to do with skulls than with sunbursts. Each new neophyte is precious and expendable in the same breath. Apothecaries monitor their progress with the care of archivists tending rare tomes. Organs are implanted, bones reforged, psych evaluations conducted in cells lined with carefully arranged bones. Those who survive to stand in armor before the mortuary chaplains at last are not greeted as sons. They are catalogued as munitions, each as a cartridge to be loaded into the bolt gun of the chapter's will and fired where necessary. Their names will matter when they are spoken over vox shrines as they die. Until then, they are numbered and positioned and sent. This is the state of the Star Phantoms when the summons for the Carthago crusade reaches Jaga. The Carthago sector lies like a bruise to the south, a region gutted not only by the long reach of Orc empires, but by the collateral agony of the Badab conflict. Supply lines have frayed. Shrine worlds have gone dark. Agri-worlds that once fed whole expeditionary fleets now feed only themselves, barely. Pirate kings and warlords have begun to carve out petty dominions among the ruins. Segmentum Command drafts its proclamations. The Carthago crusade is declared, a slow, choking effort to stabilize a region that has drifted too close to the edge. The Star Phantoms would once have sent a third of their strength to such a war. Now, they count and recount their available brothers, weigh the threats gnawing at the Badab sector, and find that they can spare only a single company. They send the fifth. Captain Calfax stands before the Hall of Echoes altar as the mortuary chaplains intone the litany of dispatch. His armor is a patchwork of plates reforged after Badab, each bearing faint scars of that campaign, each newly inscribed with the sigils of fresh duty. The hourglass on his pauldron is dark with the dust of Hakanth and Badab and nameless other wars. He listens as the names of his company are read one by one, each brother stepping forward to receive the chaplain's gaze, each being marked with a smear of bone paste across the brow. He knows how few they are. He knows how much the crusade asks. He accepts without question. The 5th Company's strike cruiser and its escorts tear themselves free of Jaga's gravity well and vanish into the warp, ash-white arrows fired from a frozen bow. They come out into a sector that stinks of smoke and old blood. Among the worlds marked as critical to the success of the Carthago crusade is Kerak, an agri-world whose forests of Cholam have long fed the crusade's regiments. The crops are not simple fields, but towering stalk forests, each plant a column of fibre and grain thicker than a man's chest, reaching up in dense stands that stretch from horizon to horizon. Harvest machine clans move through these living walls in mobile fortresses, cutting and threshing and processing, their engines the thunder of the world's continued relevance to the Imperium. Kerak has gone wrong. By the time the 5th Company's augers sweep across its surface, the world is in open revolt. The harvester clans have turned their machines into war crawlers, armoring them further, festooning them with spikes and scavenged weapons. Charnel cults have taken root in the processing halls, their altars slabs of meat, an unidentifiable organ, their icons forged in blood and bone. The skull rune of the blood god has been carved into the world's soil in harvest pattern, visible even from orbit as a faint, hateful geometry cut into fields that should have been the Imperium's lifeline. At the core of the uprising stands a figure mortals whisper about in awe and terror: Malhor the Harvester. He is no mere planetary governor gone mad from isolation. He is a warlord raised from the Harvester clans themselves, a giant of a man clad in layers of industrial armor, chain-blade gauntlets, and reaper scythes taken from the bodies of rival bosses. He preaches a creed of blood and yield, teaching that the skulls of the slain feed a god whose thirst is as boundless as any world's hunger. Around him gather the slaughterkin, cadres of fanatics who have grafted engine plates and cutting tools onto their own flesh, turning themselves into ambulatory threshers that drink both grain and gore. The war on Kherek has become a two-layered nightmare. On the ground, beneath the dense Cholam canopy, fighting is a matter of meters and seconds. Visibility rarely stretches beyond a few paces. The stalks are so close set that even Astartes must shoulder their way through, chain blades hacking pale trenches through living walls. Ambushes spring from every direction. Cultists with harvesting hooks and blood-slick shotguns burst from between the plants, shrieking praises to their god as they throw themselves into melee. The Cholam itself drinks up spilt blood, its roots gorging, its leaves staining darker with each skirmish. Above the forests, the air is no safer. The skies are choked with smoke from burning crops, with the oily exhausts of loyalist gunships and traitor harvest haulers jury-rigged with thrusters. Air duels become savage, near-blind contests, craft appearing as shadows in the mists and vanishing in storms of tracer fire and shrapnel. Whole squadrons vanish in collisions, their debris raining down in sheets of jagged metal and fuel fire, igniting new blazes that race across the fields. Into this stratified hell, the Fifth Company falls. They are supposed to be stopping only briefly. On paper, Kherek is simply a resupply waypoint, a place where Star Phantom holds can be topped up from crusade depots, where mortals can load barrels of Cholam, processed into transportable rations, into the bellies of strike craft. Calfax reads the channels differently. He sees the corrupted balances of tithe manifests, the sharp drops in yield neatly matched to spikes in reports of cult activity. He hears the tightness in the voices of Carthago Crusade, logistics officers when they mention Kherek, and the nervousness with which they avoid speaking the name Malhor. The Fifth Company comes in hot. Drop pods streak through the murk over Kherek, their descent vectors angled not for the orbital habs where supplies would normally be loaded, but for the planet's nightmare heart, Calder's Ark. Once, it was merely the largest of the Harvester fortresses, a mobile processing citadel that crawled through the Cholam stands, cutting and threshing and storing, feeding entire regiments on its own output. Now it is Malhar's throne, a spiked caravan city choked with slaughter pens and crude altars, its hull plated in layers of welded armor decorated with chains of skulls and flayed banners. Engines salvaged from downed landers and stolen armor hiss and roar along its flanks, driving it in endless circles through the deepest, densest fields. Calfax chooses not to ask permission. The first wave of pods slams into the Ark's upper. Decks like a meteor shower. Impact plates tear open, spill fire and smoke and shock waves through corridors that have never known such violation. Cultists, stumbling between altars and blood-slick assembly lines, are torn apart by jagged shards of metal, their bodies flung into walls already stained brown with old gore. Those who survive the initial impact find their footing only long enough to hear the grinding roar of pod doors blowing outward. Ash-white giants stride into the chaos. Bolters thump in the confined spaces, every shot turning a human torso into a burst of red mist and shattered bone. The slaughterkin throw themselves at the intruders, chain blades spinning, cutting arcs of sparks and blood across ceramite greaves. Some manage to wound, to carve channels in armor, or take a lesser brother from his feet. The Star Phantoms do not slow. They answer with close, punishing bursts, with crushing blows from armored fists and the bite of chain blades tuned not for finesse but for raw, shredding power. The Ark's corridors become grinding mills in truth. Bodies, human and transhuman alike, are fed into the teeth of weapons and machinery. Conveyor belts jam under the weight of fallen cultists and hacked-apart servitors. Sacrificial vats built to take in grain and output processed ration blocks gulp down handfuls of corpses before their systems overload, and they belch steam and liquefied flesh. The Ark lurches in its course, drivers long since dead at their stations, engines surging and stuttering in response to damage and corrupted machine spirits. Calfax drives for the heart. Guided by Auspex readings and captured schematics, he takes his veterans down through levels that reek of blood and oil, down past halls where skulls hang in their thousands from ceiling chains, down into the central control cathedral where the remnants of the Harvester clan's old machine cult have given themselves wholly to Malhor's vision. The warlord awaits them atop a mound of skulls and engine parts, his bulk wrapped in armor stitched from reaper blades and plow plates. Twin chain gauntlets idling at his sides with a hungry whine. Around him, the slaughterkin form a living wall, their bodies studded with augmetic saws and threshing tools, their faces painted in gore, their eyes blank with devotion. The clash is brief and monstrous. Calfax kills his way through the wall with the blunt inevitability that defines his chapter. He loses brothers to Malhor's butcher tools, to scything blades that take arms and heads and entire torsos, but each loss is paid for with bolter volleys that blow the slaughterkin apart in sprays of meat, with melter blasts that turn engine-clad heretics into puddles of molten metal and boiled fat. When he reaches the mound itself, he does not bother with taunts. He fires his combi melter into Malhar's chest at such close range that the blast strips the paint from his own pauldron. The warlord's armor buckles and opens, rib cage and spine, and the monstrous beating engine of his corrupted heart reduced in an instant to steam and slurry. Malhar falls, chain gauntlets thrashing a last wild pattern in the air before locking up, teeth grinding impotently. The shock breaks the cult. Word of the Harvester's death runs through the slaughterkin like a spasm. Some throw themselves all the harder into the fight, desperate to earn a last nod from the god they believe watches them through the dead man's eyes. Others break, howling, casting down their weapons and trying to flee into the depths of the Ark or the trees beyond. It does not matter. The Star Phantoms are there too, their doctrine of direct destruction treating retreating backs with as much contempt as charging blades. Within days, Carrick is functionally decapitated. The charnel cult altars are broken, their stones shattered, their icons fed into the same furnaces that will once again process Cholam instead of flesh. The surviving Harvester clans are given a choice between renewed obedience and the pyre. Many take the former. Enough choose the latter to give the mortuary chaplains a week of long, satisfying work. The Fifth Company does not linger to watch the Crusade's logisticians tally their reclaimed yields. They have other calls to answer. The late years of the 41st millennium are full of such unnamed wars. Star Phantom strike cruisers burn in and out of Orc-held systems, their bombardment patterns reducing greenskin forts to smoking glass before any formal war council can even be assembled planetside. Chaos Raiders find their altars smashed and their ships gutted by boarding actions that leave no survivors to crawl away and preach other, darker gospels. Each engagement is a brief flare of violence in the dark, here and gone before the wider Imperium even registers the threat. Not all of their brothers fight under their own colors. Loath though they are to share their doctrine, the chapter acknowledges its duty to the Long Watch. Brothers are seconded to the Death Watch, their hourglass sigils temporarily hidden beneath the heraldry of the Ordo Xenos. They take their obsessions with them into black arcs and watch fortresses, bringing the cold arithmetic of the mortuary cult to the eclectic, often uneasy coalitions of kill teams. Some die there, far from Jaga, in ways the chapter would consider exemplary. Brother Mercure is one such name. He falls on the walls of Watch Fortress Eriok, armor blackened by countless missions, bolted down to its last magazine, holding a portal against an alien tide so numerous and so warped that the minds of mortal garrison crews cannot even name it without breaking. He fights until his weapon clicks dry, then until his chain-blade teeth are serrated with bone, then until his fists shatter against chitin and metal. His broken body is found heaped against the threshold, surrounded by a wall of corpses that makes of him a pillar in a rampart built of the dead. His genocide does not return to Jaga. Reports and a single charred pauldron do. The pauldron joins the others in the ossuaries, hollowed out of the memento mori's bones, hung on iron hooks in chapels where the ice creaks in the walls and the wind claws at the hull outside. His name is added to the chantry rolls. His death is weighed and found worthy. He goes, in the chapter's eyes, to the judge with his duty not only done, but weaponized. So the story goes, war after war. A shrewd migration tears away their first home. The Macarian heresy bleeds them against former allies. The Badab war cuts them down to less than half their former strength. Jaga gives them shelter without comfort. Carthago calls them back out into the fire. Kerak gives them a momentary bloody victory, nothing more. There is no surge of new recruits to fill out their companies. No miraculous gene seed recoveries. No sudden decree from on high that grants them respite. Instead, there is the slow, steady drip of names. Every campaign adds more to the lists intoned in the Hall of Echoes. Every siege, every purge, every void battle fought in some nameless system pushes another handful of star phantoms from the upper skull of the hourglass into the lower. Their fortress monastery on Jaga accumulates relics and bones and banners, growing heavier with memory, even as its living population remains stubbornly thin. They do not rue this. They were never meant to be a chapter that thrives. They were made to endure and to bury, to walk the dying edges of the Imperium and record the manner of its unmaking. On an ice moon at the edge of a ruined sector, inside the coffined hull of a battle barge that should have been allowed to rest centuries ago, they continue to do exactly that. One cartridge, one brother, one more name whispered into the Vox shrines at a time. The skull on the lectern is human, but it has forgotten whose face it once carried. Its eye sockets are lined with silver. Thin wires run from the drilled bases of its cheekbones into the plastec of the lectern itself, feeding a constant trickle of power to the Vox grill set where its teeth once were. Incense pools around it, smoke seeping from the nostrils in slow, measured breaths, as if the skull were still alive and drawing in the thick air of the Hall of Echoes. Brother Chaplain Darnak stands behind it, gauntleted hands resting on either side of the relic, skull-helmed face lowered, as if in private conversation with the bone beneath. Around him, the assembled brothers stand in ranked silence, armor ash pale and black, hourglass sigils dull under the low light. Some are veterans, their plates etched with the names of sieges and purges, their hourglass bands almost black with worked-in dust. Others are younger, their armor cleaner, their scars fresher, their eye lenses not yet dimmed by centuries of service. All of them listen. "He is Imperator Mortifex," Darnak says. The skull, Vox, picking up and magnifying his voice until the words seem to come from empty bone. He is not the golden warrior idol of the Ministerum's gaudy cathedra. He is not the soft-faced icon painted on the prayer cards of hive workers. He is the judge of the dead. He lets the title hang in the incense-thick air, a weight as heavy as any stone. The Emperor sits upon a throne made of skeletons and ruined machines, he continues, his eyes fixed not on the living who squander their brief breath on whining and petition, but on the dead who come to him bearing the marks of how they spent their time. Every corpse is a line in his ledger. Every skull is a coin. We are the hands that give him wealth. There is no boast in his tone, only fact. The mortuary cult of the Star Phantoms does not love the Emperor in the way civilized men are taught to. They do not imagine him as a distant, kindly patriarch who watches over the faithful and intervenes in their petty worries. They know him as a function, a gravity well at the end of all things. They call him Imperator Mortifex because to them he is the apex of a hierarchy of endings. The aquila that other chapters bear upon their chests as a symbol of soaring might is, in the Star Phantoms' halls, carved most often into headstones and ossuary lintels. The double-headed eagle stares down not at parades of the living, but at neatly stacked rows of skulls. In murals etched into the memento mori's inner hull, the Emperor's outstretched hands do not reach to lift his people up from their suffering. They point downward, to the endless crowds of the dead gathered beneath his throne. Under such eyes, every corpse counts. We go where we are sent, Darnik says, because our license is his. We kill whom we must because each life ended is accounted for, weighed, measured. We are not butchers for the sake of blood. We are tithe collectors. We bring him what is owed. It is a justification and a burden. Every time Star Phantom, Star, bolters bark, every time a chain blade chews through bone, every time bombardment cannons erase a city, they do so in the surety that somewhere, in some unfathomable metaphysical ledger, the tally moves. Only in death does duty end. The phrase is old, older than the chapter, older than most of the Imperium's current institutions. Guardsmen drill with it on training grounds soaked in the sweat of generations. Battle sisters whisper it before charging into hails of fire. Many chapters of the Adeptus Astartes have adopted it as an article of faith, a promise that at the moment of ending, there is release. The Star Phantoms deny that comfort. For the living, Darnak says, duty has not yet fully begun. You labor in the dust, you fire your weapons, you bleed. You are unfinished. You are the mold, not the cast. Only when you die can you be taken in hand by the judge and measured. Only then can your weight be added to the structure of his design, until your skull rests in a niche, until your name is carved into stone and spoken over vox shrines. You are not yet what you were meant to be. They twist the familiar maxim into something harsher. For them, the living are a problem to be resolved, a column of figures awaiting final calculation. To exist is to be pending. To die is to submit your account. Their funerary customs reflect this obsession. Every battle brother carries his own relic of mortality into war. Some wear small ossuaries on chains at their belts, containing a pinch of ash from Hakanth, a sliver of bone from Cormag, a fragment of shattered armor from Badab. Others have tiny reliquary cases built into their gorgets or braces, glass-fronted and sealed with wax and purity parchment, within which sits a single, carefully selected tooth or phalanx, taken from a brother or an honored enemy. Before battle, they kneel in the chapels hollowed out of the memento mori's decks and grind bone dust into their armor. Mortals and serfs bring bowls of the substance scraped from ossuary floors and carefully sifted. The brothers dip gauntleted fingers into the powder and rub it into the seams of their plates, into the grooves of their chapter badges, into the inscriptions carved around their helm rims. The fine grit rasps softly against ceramite, sinking into scratches and micro fissures, leaving a faint, persistent pall that no amount of scrubbing truly removes. It is not merely ritual. Bone dust, mixed with oils and abrasives, makes a passable lapping compound. It eases the movement of armor plates, fills minute imperfections, helps seals sit more snugly. The Star Phantoms see no contradiction in using their enemies' remains to keep their war gear in killing order. If anything, they relish the efficiency. On the field, the moment the guns fall silent is the moment the rites begin. While other chapters might fall to the ground in exhaustion or lift their voices in crude victory cries, Star Phantoms move through the carnage with the unhurried calm of undertakers, Apothecaries and their attendants make for the fallen Astartes first, reclaiming gene seed with practiced brutality, cutting into chests and necks, prizing out organs still warm or already cooling. Mortuary chaplains follow, marking each space where a brother fell with a sigil traced in blood or ash, noting names in coded script that will be transferred later to the chantry rolls. Once their own dead are accounted for, the loyalists and enemies alike are sorted. Mass graves are anathema to the cult's sensibilities. They prefer order. Pits are dug in neat rows, trenches are lined with military precision. Enemy bodies are dragged in and stacked, limb to limb, forming dense, compact layers. Loyalist dead are given separate places, their corpses arranged more carefully, armor straightened, weapons laid beside them if time allows. When fire is used, it is not random. Pyres are built with an eye to geometry, to symmetry, to presentation. Bones are broken and arranged in patterns that reflect the hourglass motif. Skulls are placed atop mounds in lines that mirror the sigils carved into the chapter's armor. When the lighters are applied and the flames take hold, the battlefield becomes a lit temple of smoke and ash. The dead of Cormag burned in such patterns, the heretics of Kerak, the rebels of Thoth, and the nameless millions on unnamed worlds. From orbit, such fields can sometimes be seen as faint designs, scorched into the earth, sigils only the Emperor and the Star Phantoms are meant to read. Their tactical doctrine is shaped by this mortuary mindset. They have no interest in the romantic notions of duels and glorious charges that animate some of their cousins. Close combat is a tool, not a sacrament. Honor is a word they use sparingly, and then most often in connection with duty fulfilled, not with the style of its execution. War begins, whenever possible, with a fall. Drop pods are their favored instrument. They rain from the skies in storms, ceramite coffins trailing fire and debris, each one a precision-delivered package of murder. Star Phantoms favor mass drops, saturating key points with overwhelming presence, rather than attempting the delicate insertion of a few elites. They land between enemy lines and friendly formations, as often as behind fortified bastions, unconcerned with the fragility of mortal units caught in the crossfire. The strike of the pods is paired with a doctrine of fire. Devastator squads are the backbone of their battle companies, more numerous than most Codex-compliant chapters would allow. They move forward with heavy weapons already locked and loaded, prepared to establish immediate fire lanes that turn landing sites into fortified nests. Their fondness for mobile firepower means they often employ grav platforms and tracked mounts for their heavier guns, allowing them to reposition as the battle's bones shift underfoot. Assault squads are few. In the chapter's eyes, a blade swung in melee is a measurement of failure somewhere earlier in the chain. It means a target was not adequately suppressed, a firing solution miscalculated, a barrage insufficiently thorough. They do not shun the blade when it is necessary. They simply do not glorify it. Their armory reflects this priority. Plasma weapons abound in their racks, their coils etched with warding sigils, and their vents stained with old scorch marks. Melter guns, combi melters, multi-melters, all the instruments of close range, high energy annihilation, are maintained with the meticulous attention a more knightly chapter might reserve for power swords. Whole squads are trained to carry such tools into breaches, to reduce bunkers and armored columns to slagged skeletons. Their tank companies are thick with vindicators. The stub-nosed siege tanks, with their heavy frontal armor and demolisher cannons, are beloved by Star Phantom commanders. They crack walls, crush infantry, and erase defensive positions with a few well-placed shells. Land raiders form the other pillar of their armored core, fortress tanks that carry tactical squads into the jaws of enemy fire. Lascannons stitching burning scars across entire ranks of opposing armor. Above and before all of this fall, the Death Storm pattern drop pods. Where a standard pod carries a squad of Astartes, A death storm carries only guns. Its doors slam open on impact to reveal banks of auto-loading heavy bolters or missile racks that swivel and track and kill with the unfussy, inhuman precision of machine spirits given simple parameters and told to reap. The Star Phantoms treat such pods as autonomous shrines of execution, dropping them to form walls of area denial that churn anything foolish enough to approach into paste. Command within this machinery of death is as much spiritual as strategic. Every company marches with its own mortuary chaplain. These black-armored priests are more than exhorters and disciplinarians. They are the interpreters of the ledger, the ones who decide which deaths count as worthy offerings and which must be recorded as failures. In battle, their Crozius-wielding forms are never far from the thickest fighting, not because they seek glory, but because they must witness and mark. Above them stand 4 reclusiarchs, each responsible for whole swathes of the chapter's scattered deployments, and above them all the Master of Sanctity, whose helm might as well be a skull carved from obsidian, so little of the man beneath ever shows. These officers form the spine of the chapter as much as any Lord Captain. If a captain were to show reluctance in carrying out a necessary purge, it would be the chaplains who corrected him. If a company began to waver in its devotion, they would be the ones to cut out the diseased segments. Their sermons in the ossuary chapels of Jaga shape doctrine as surely as strategium briefings. They decide what events are to be commemorated in bone and bronze, and what are to be quietly filed away as errors in calculation. Outside their own numbers, the Star Phantoms are strangers even to those ostensibly on the same side. On the bridge of a convoy escort, an admiral of the Imperial Navy watches them through hololithic feeds and fails to draw more than a handful of curt responses from their shipmasters. Requests for detailed coordination are acknowledged with clipped confirmations, then folded into battle plans that treat the Navy's hulls as movable terrain rather than cherished assets. On a blasted world where a multi-chapter force grinds itself against an entrenched Xenos host, a captain of a more openly zealous chapter tries to engage a Star Phantom brother in the exchange of glories and liturgies that have comforted warriors since the First Legion walked. The Star Phantom listens in silence, then replies with a single, flat question. What is your acceptable casualty range for this assault? Even within the black-clad ranks of the Death Watch, where the differences between chapters are both blurred and sharpened by proximity, the hourglass sigil is an unsettling presence. Kill team members from other chapters speak in private of the Star Phantom's uncanny calm when mission parameters shift from extraction to extermination. Where a salamander might flinch at a command to glass an inhabited settlement to deny it to the Xenos, a Star Phantom will simply adjust his Auspex settings and begin selecting firing solutions. Where a white scar might feel the itch of their wanderlust, the ash-white brother beside him feels only the familiar hum of the ledger being updated. They speak of their own death in the same way they speak of ammunition expenditure. If I fall here, one might say in the quiet between deployments, it will save the equivalent of 3 squads in later operations. If I remain, the cost curve flattens. There is no melodrama in it, no fatalism, just calculus. The Inquisition has, more than once, considered whether such a mindset passes over the line into practical heresy. After the purging of Cormag, after the annihilation of the 17th Trax Guard, after the near fratricide with the Marines Malevolent, after Badab, agents of the Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos have come calling. They demand records. They question chaplains in starlit confessionals and captains in blood-stained strategia. They walk the ossuary halls of the Memento Mori and Jaga with macro quills, scraping notes into vellum, counting skulls, passing epitaphs. They examine the chapter's litanies, its catechisms, its minor rites for the cleaning of bolter mechanisms and the fettling of Land Raider engines, searching for phrases that might betray devotion to something other than the hidden corpse upon the Golden Throne. They find nothing overt. No demonic sigils are hidden in the scrollwork. No unapproved names are invoked when the chaplains call upon the judge. The gene seed cultures, sampled under the watchful eyes of tech marines and vat-born adepts, show no dangerous deviations beyond the expected. There is no telltale warp resonance in the halls of echoes, beyond the normal psychic residue of 1,000 recorded deaths. What they find instead is extremity. They find chaplains who speak of culling populations in the same tone other men use for discussing weather. They find battle logs that list civilian casualties in columns as neat and precise as those devoted to enemy combatants, with no special annotation beyond the occasional admission that actual losses exceeded projected ones. They find a chapter whose faith is so hard and ungentle that it makes even hardened witch hunters bristle. In the end, the Inquisition's notes close, again and again, on the same tight phrasing. Fanatic, yet loyal. The files are sealed. The star phantoms are returned to their wars. The mystery of their making remains another line in those restricted archives. Officially, their gene sire is unknown. The 23rd founding that birthed them drew on many old vaults, some little more than dust and rumor. The Administratum lists the star phantoms as an unassigned lineage, a branch without a named trunk, a tool forged from fragments. Unofficially, questions linger. There is something in their secrecy that echoes the First Legion, something in their penchant for fighting forlorn sieges at the edge of the Imperium, for standing watch over secrets and scars, that recalls the shadowed work of the Sons of the Lion. Their hourglass badge, too, bears a faint resonance with certain relic sigils found in long sealed rock archives, or so some inquisitors claim in half-burnt notes. The Dark Angels deny this link with icy fury when it is raised. The Star Phantoms do the same. They do not appreciate implications that they are anything other than what they choose to be. Their unknown parentage is, to them, less a wound than an irrelevance. They serve the judge. They serve the ledger. Bloodlines are for the living to fret over. In truth, whether their genocide carries some shard of the lion or another Primarch entirely, the culture that has grown around it has become its own terrible inheritance. In the Star Phantoms, the Imperium can see itself with the masks removed. Here is war as liturgy, unsoftened by talk of liberation or glory. When their devastators set up their heavy bolters and lascannons, when their gunners sight targets down the length of demolisher barrels, they do so as acolytes at altar rails, fingers on triggers that are as much rosary beads as mechanisms. When bombardment cannons fire, the recoil that shudders through the bones of the memento mori is a congregation saying, Amen. Each purge is a hymn. Each exterminated population is a psalm, its verses written in fire and rewritten in ash. Each skull taken for the ossuaries of Jaga is a word in an endless scripture that only grows more complex as centuries pass. There is no room in this gospel for redemption in the sense mortals might hope for. There is only the refining of the galactic corpse. Piece by piece, war by war, the Star Phantoms enact their cruel litany. They strip away flesh. They burn out corruption. They reduce worlds to relics. In a sane universe, such a chapter would be a horror story whispered to frightened children. In the 41st millennium, where the Imperium survives by devouring itself, they are simply one of the purer forms of the faith that keeps it on its feet. They are mortuary angels, wings of shrapnel and exhaust, halos of muzzle flash and plasma flare, descending over battlefields to carry souls, willing or not, to the only judgment that matters. And when the last hourglass runs empty, they will stand in the silence and know that they have done exactly as they were made to do. The skull on the lectern speaks in a borrowed chorus of the dead, but the story it tells now is not of a single battle or a single martyr. It is of a long, slow unraveling, measured in sieges and purges, and the steady thinning of a chapter that never had any use for the word mercy. Once there was a founding, not a glorious, trumpeted birth in an age of expansion, but a quiet, desperate act in a time when the borders of the Imperium were coming apart. In the dust-choked vaults of terror, the High Lords signed their names to a decree that raised new chapters not to conquer, but to hold on. The Sentinel Founding, they called it, as if the right words could make of a failing realm a fortress again. From that parchment and those genocide vaults came the Star Phantoms. They were hurled into the Sakara marches, a belt of systems already gnawed to ruin by nameless Xenos and forgotten wars. They took Hakanth as their first home, a shrine world carved into a planet of tombs. They walked ossuary corridors in bare boots before ever donning ceramite, learned to clean bones before they learned to strip a bolter. They were guardians of a mausoleum that encircled an entire world. Then the Hrud came, and time itself betrayed them. Hakanth aged and regressed and cracked apart in the jaws of a migration that turned stone to slurry and lives to smears of overlapping possibility. Orcs died screaming in orbit alongside Star Phantom vessels as the temporal storm tore them down to rust or flung them forward to brittle ruin. Omadon Tiresias, the first true master of the chapter, ordered an evacuation, not because he lacked taste for martyrdom, but because he knew a parody of sacrifice when he saw one. They fled into exile, the battle barge Memento Mori dragging itself out of the collapsing sector like a coffin pulled from a burning mausoleum, carrying with it only a remnant of the chapter and as many relics as could be hauled up from the dying world's guts. After that, every war they fought was colored by the memory of a home torn out of reality. They saved Cormag in the way, only they could. A fortress world, half mad after centuries under the slow, cutting siege of the Krav, called for aid. The Star Phantoms answered. They broke the Xenos nest webs with bombardment that turned the void into a blizzard of burning shards. Their drop pods fell into the mud between Bastion and Swarm. Their guns helped drive the enemy back from the walls. The fortress gates opened, and the gaunt defenders came out to meet their supposed saviors. The chaplains tasted the rot that centuries of psychic abrasion and compromise had left in Cormag's garrison and found it intolerable. The pivot was as fast as the pull of a trigger. In the same breath that saw the Xenos exterminated, friendly Bastion guns turned inward, and Star Phantom bolters reaped the very men whose Vox codes had summoned them. Salvation by fire. A fortress world purged and reborn as a penal colony, its history rewritten under a stamp that read simply, "Threat removed." They marched with the greatest lord. Solar the age had seen, and left their stain there as well. In the blazing years of the Macarian crusade, ash-white strike cruisers hung on the southern flank of the expanding imperial banners. When Macarius needed fortresses broken or resistance ground into powder on a timetable, no sane commander would have accepted. He pointed at the hourglass sigil and watched problems turn into craters. He also watched guard regiments vanish under misjudged barrages and too-wide kill zones. He judged the Star Phantoms unsuitable for close support of mortal units because their calculus of acceptable loss had no foothold in human pity. After his death, in the wars of succession and secession that swelled like infection in the shadow of his deeds, the chapter's ledger grew heavier and darker. On Thoth, they erased an entire regiment of the Trax Guard for sins that, on paper, amounted to wrong loyalties at the wrong time. They came close to destroying the Marines' malevolent in a series of retaliatory engagements that looked, to dispassionate eyes, uncomfortably like a private war. The Inquisition peered into their halls then, searching for the warp's stain, and found none. The conclusion written into sealed dossiers was always the same: fanatic, yet loyal. At Badab, they were executioners again. Their fleet helped break the ring of orbital steel that had guarded the tyrant's world, their shells turning star forts into spreading fields of wreckage. Their companies burned in the corridors of the High Guard, and on the plains beneath the Palace of Thorns, ash-white armor shattered alongside the colors of a dozen other chapters. They lost brothers in numbers that would have crippled more prideful sons of the Emperor. They took the losses as the unavoidable cost of cracking a renegade throne. When the war was done, the Imperium rewarded them with responsibility. They were given the battered Badab sector to watch over, the Ice Moon Jaga to haunt. They drove the Memento Mori into its crust and turned that stranded hulk into a frozen monastery, a fortress built out of the bones of their oldest ship. From there, under strength and slowly rebuilding, they went out again, answering the call of the Carthago crusade, purging Kerak and other nameless worlds with the same cold economy that had seen them through Hrud storms and civil wars. Their story is a line that starts in a shrine world of tombs, passes through a sector torn out of time, and ends, for now, in a coffin ship half swallowed by ice, still vomiting fire. Even the beginning of that line does not sit still. In the neat ink of administratum ledgers, the star phantoms belong to the 23rd founding, raised in the early 38th millennium as sentinels of failing borders. It is written, stamped, cross-referenced. To most, that is enough. But there are other records. In a crumbling archive on a world scarred by the Sakura Wars, a data slate speaks of a cleansing undertaken. Not long after the Great Betrayal, when the wounds of the heresy were still raw and legion names still shocked Vox halls, the account describes a joint assault by the flesh-tearers and another force, ash-armored, bearing a sigil of skulls bound into an hourglass shape. The dates do not agree. They cannot agree. Either the chronicle is wrong, its scribe careless with the ordering of millennia, or the founding writs on terror were altered, or some hand has moved through the archives adjusting columns until the line from then to now looks clean. There are those who whisper that this is the shadow of the First Legion at work, that the Dark Angels or their agents have a vested interest in blurring the true age and provenance of a chapter whose habits in denied wars and quiet purges mirror some of their own. Others claim it is merely the inevitable erosion of memory in a bureaucracy built on forgetting. For a storyteller, it is an open vein, a savant of the Ordo Hereticus, poring over incompatible parchments, could peel back layers of ink to find truths the chapter would rather keep ossified. A chaplain could burn a fragment of an old seal and claim, in the privacy of a siege chapel, that his brothers once stood in a different era, beside different colors, that their founding was a reaction not to border wars, but to the treachery of brother against brother. Whatever the truth, the effect is the same. The star phantoms live in the cracks of history. Many of their wars are never meant to be known. They fight in theaters that are later stamped denied by administratum censors, whole campaigns reduced to a line and a classification. They are dispatched to worlds whose very names are scrubbed from charts when the work is done. The Purging of Cormag is recorded in full only in sealed logs, its neat phrasing disguising the scale of the cull. The annihilation of the Trax regiment on Thoth is buried in restricted archives. The wars they wage in the southern reaches of the Segmentum against Orc empires and pale chaos enclaves leave behind only scorched planets and heavily redacted after-action reports. Their victories are unsung, not because they lack spectacle, but because the Imperium cannot afford to admit how often its angels of death are turned inward. To the administrators who shift markers on star charts from hostile to compliant, they are brutally reliable. Point them at a problem, and it goes away. Supply requisitions from ash-white ships are grim but predictable. Their casualty projections are tidy. The cost is horrifying on a human scale, But the Imperium does not think in human scales. A world burned, a regiment erased, a hive reduced to fused glass, all are acceptable if the ledger on the other side of the equation reads threat removed. To the men and women in the trenches and the bastions, they are something else. A guardsman on Cormag sees ash-white giants descend from the sky, break an enemy that has gnawed at his world since before his grandparents were born, and for one shuddering heartbeat believes in salvation. Then he sees those same giants raise their weapons and turn the killing pattern inward. If he lives through the opening volleys and the crush that follows, if he drags himself away under a pile of smoking bodies or survives by accident in a collapsed bunker, he carries a scar that no amount of propaganda can heal. In his nightmares, liberation and extermination wear the same hourglass badge. Inquisitors view the star phantoms with a hunter's wary respect. They are thorough in ways most chapters are not. They will not flinch from the uncomfortable solutions. They will scouring a shrine world down to bare rock if they are convinced the taint runs that deep. In an Imperium where most resources are stretched thin and truly decisive action rare, such absolute commitment is a desirable blade to have in the vault. Yet whenever the Ordo strokes that blade, it cuts along edges that nick the fingers holding it. The mortuary cult's fixation on the dead and its indifference to the living is an affront even to those whose whole lives are spent in the politics of annihilation. Files fill with careful notes. No mutation, no warp signatures beyond expected levels, no iconography outside approved bounds, no oaths of allegiance sworn anywhere but to the Emperor's judge. Again and again the tests come back clean, and again the margin notes read the same. Question mark. Watch closely. There are cracks to slip into for those who would tell stories. A guardsman who crawls away from the pyres of Cormag, his lungs scarred by smoke and his faith shredded, can spend the rest of his truncated life trying to understand how the prayers he muttered under bombardment turned into words on the lips of the men who gunned down his comrades. He can join a cult that worships the mortuary angels as true faces of the Emperor, or a rebellion that paints their sigil on walls as a warning. An Inquisitor assigned to investigate the circumstances of the Trax regiment's extinction can follow rumors and transcripts from Thoth to Jarga, walking the ice corridors of the Memento Mori, comparing the cold fervor of chaplains to the desperate testimony of dying officers. She can examine data that refuses to settle into a comfortable pattern and decide whether to stamp the file closed or tear it open and risk a war her masters do not want. A brother of a more straightforward chapter, pressed into the Death Watch, can find himself in a kill team beside an ash-white colossus who recites casualty projections instead of battle cries, who is willing to sacrifice entire civilian populations to deny a single genestealer cult a breeding ground. The mission might succeed. The brother might return to his own chapter and find that the inevitable question in his master's eyes is not how many Xenos he killed, but whether he came back with something worse in his head. The mortuary cult is not an aberration. It is a logical endpoint. The Imperium fails and fails and fails. Worlds are lost because supply chains break, because administratum scribes misfile requests, because governors embezzle, because warp storms close, because no one was watching the right cogitator monitor at the right time. Every failure is too large, too old, too embedded in the bones of the regime to be truly fixed, so they are sanctified instead. If a world starves because tithes are miscalculated, a saint is found in its ashes. If a regiment is abandoned and dies to a man, their patch of ground becomes holy. If a chapter exterminates not only a Xenos infestation, but the garrison that survived it, the action is written into a litany of purity and taught as precedent. The Star Phantoms are simply more honest about it. They take systemic failure and carve it directly into doctrine. They do not pretend that war protects. It consumes. They do not pretend that the lives they burn are anything other than fuel. They speak of duty and judgment and the glory of ending, but never of hope. Their piety is as deep as any shrine world pilgrims, but it is focused on the grave, not the road leading to it. They are genuinely loyal. They hate chaos with a fanatic's clarity. The Xenos is to them either vermin or unspeakable aberration, fit only to be erased. They do not dream of carving out empires the way Huron did. They do not scheme to turn their guns on terror. When the call comes, tainted or not, they answer. They are also, by any measure that counts individual lives, as anything but numbers, abhorrent. A world saved by star phantoms is rarely one that looks much like itself afterwards. Populations vanish, cities become piles of slag and bone. Regiments that fought beside them find themselves listed as collateral, their dead folded into the same neat columns as the enemies they faced. The Inquisition has never found overt taint in them. The gene seed tithed. To Mars, when Mars gets it, grows true. No hidden sigils lie under their paint. No secret oaths are spoken in the dry air of Jaga's vaults. They do not bargain with warp things in exchange for easier victories. They do not hide fallen brothers who have turned their faces from the Emperor. They simply push imperial doctrine to its cruel conclusion. In the end, there is a chaplain walking a chantry deck aboard the Memento Mori. Outside, Jaga's storms claw at the half-buried hull, ice screeching over scarred plates. Inside, the air is thick with incense and the cold hum of recycled atmosphere and engine thrum. Skull shrines line the walls in dense ranks, each one wired to a vox node, each one able to play back the last breaths of 100 dead men. The chaplain's footfalls ring dully on the deck. He moves slowly, reading the names engraved into the plates underfoot as he passes, letting his gaze flick up now and then to the hololithic displays flickering at the far end of the chamber. On those translucent panes of light, new wars are already being drawn. Red icons mark hostile fleets. Amber sigils pulse over worlds that have slipped from regular tithe. Thin lines trace projected crusade routes. Every symbol is superimposed over older maps burned faintly into the projectors, ghost charts of Hakanth, of Cormag, of Badab, of Kerak, of nameless systems that never made it onto public records. The past and the future share the same space, translucent layers of ruin. As he paces, names whisper from the Skullvox shrines. They are the last words of brothers fallen in siege corridors, on fortress walls, in drop pods that never opened. They are the death cries of guardsmen whose helmets were recording when the shells came in. They are the static, broken oaths of captains as their ships died. Some are little more than screams, some are prayers, some are silence. The chaplain listens and murmurs responses under his breath, not in comfort, but in acknowledgement. Each name is a tick in the ledger, each echo a reminder that the work is never done. This is the Imperium, laid bare, not the shining empire of propaganda Picts, where brave men and women stand shoulder to shoulder and hold back the dark for the sake of a golden future. Not even the tragic realm of crushed potential some philosophers dare indulge in. It is a machine that eats its own, stamps the bones into purity seals, and hangs them on its armor as proof of virtue. In the star phantoms, that machine shows its true face. They are the angels of death, stripped of illusions, the ones who do not pretend that what they bring is anything but ending. They stand in frozen halls, inside a dead ship on a dead moon, drawing fresh lines of attack directly over the ghosts of the last war, and they are satisfied. They do not have to lie to themselves and call it hope. They call it salvation.